Alright. Hello everybody, this is your boy Shrimp once again, back to you with more Art with Adventure. For this stream, once again, we'll continue with the uh, Adams Family Wednesday Adams fan art that I'm trying to create or finished for now. Uh, yeah. This time, yeah, we still need to polish the finalization of this art, but it has shaped really well from the last time that we saw this thing. Alright, for the coloring of the background, still need some improvement. Add some few more colors, so, obviously. A bit of green here and there, but majority will be blue. And some good lighting would pretty much work this out. Yeah, like last time I discussed also, I would like to put some indications that it's raining, and so she will be wet. Still don't know if I can make the indications on the clothes, except for the water drops that will be spill over her clothes and body. Maybe, I don't know if it's already so dark, so not sure if I can add something that will make it indicate that it's wet. Maybe make the clothes a bit having a skin tone kind of a color. That might work. But other than that, I'll continue with the background also right now. I'll do that first. Add some few grasses over here and there, and make this shape. The shape looks kind of funny, so it looks like a brain or a broccoli. Need to fix that up. But so far the trees looks pretty solid, especially this part. Alright, so let's continue with also the story of the Dead Mage Who Doesn't Go the Fourth Time. Coming up with chapter 106. Let me just open this up quickly in my other window. Sorry if the sound comes in.
Chapter.
Okay, there we go. Sorry, it was very loud. Okay. So yeah, the title for this story is regarding the difficulty of communication between races. So, last time I believe we had a issue with some silas. If you don't know what those are, they're half female, half octopus kind of a creature. Body of top body will be a female. Yeah, bottom will be an octopus. So kind of kinky, but who knows why the author decided to design something like this. uh, but other than that, I think the story is getting really interesting because we have some few human and other race issues coming up, and it will be interesting to hear what will be happening in this territory that Vanderlei just walked into with his people. Now he can just like move around with some of his people due to the upgrades that they got from the last time that they level up. So yeah, let's see what will happen to the story. Alright, okay, I think that's pretty much I would like to talk about for the story and for the design that we are about to do. Let's see, open on some reference sheet here from Pinterest, some of the collection I did, and some of the research I did for this fan art. I'll definitely see some. Oh yeah, I forgot to see if once again, forgot to check if I have some reference I need to see in my collection. Where is that? Excuse me. So sorry. Alright. So we got. Forgot that we. No, not in desktop. Alright, the desktop. Sorry. I should have done this before starting the stream, but yeah, sometimes I got too excited to start already. Alright, here we are. I've been using this as a screen saver for my desktop, and it's pretty wild. I love the color and shading on this one, and the mixing of the cool and warm colors. Like, look at this butterfly. The left side is warm, the right side is cool. Just brilliant. It's brilliant, and as you can see, the mixing also in the hair. I've shown this thing to you guys last time, so pretty much explains already why I'm using this. I'm gonna move it to the other side of my screen so that I can look at it every now and then. What's wrong with my throat? Anyway, let's see. I do have some. Where's that BG? Here we go. Alright, we got some BG references that I might need to use. Come on, come on, come on. But, yeah, we used this last time. And sorry if I'm moving too fast. Kind of used to it already and knows most of the stuff that I already have here in my collection. But still, I need to find something that is wet. That is wet. I don't know if I have that kind of a sample. Raining sequence. Yeah, not so sure if I have one. Could be someone in my desktop. I'll probably check it out later while I start doing the water, if I can find one. I really need to collect some already in my. Let's see the guide. Maybe there's something in the guide. We do have some water water stuff here I would use, but not now. We got some elementals, mechs. Yeah, not so sure if I have something that might help us right now. Oh well, I will just do that later. In any case, with that, let us start with the That Mage 2004 time once again, and me continue with my artwork. I'll talk to you guys later again, and hopefully you would enjoy me doing some of my art over here. And the story too, if you're into the story. Alright, okay. Talk to you guys again later.
To 106, regarding the difficulty of communication between races. Leaving poor Vina and Princess Livia behind, Vandali rushed towards the person who had produced the scream that had reached his ears. What he found was a beautiful woman with hair of a bright green blonde color that wouldn't be seen on Earth, seemingly drowning in the river. Kyra, still screaming, she was flailing at the water's surface with both her arms. There was no dangerous monster or suspicious silhouette that could be a murderer anywhere nearby. She was just drowning perhaps? Vandali stared at this beautiful woman with his face sticking out of the thicket on the riverbank, even forgetting to put his stretched out tongue away. The reason for this was that the sight before him was a very strange one. Normally, someone with pride in their swimming abilities might leap into the river right away to save the drowning woman. However, no matter how Vandali looked at the situation, the beautiful woman was not drowning. First of all, the woman was unmistakably a Scylla. The lower half of the woman's body couldn't be seen as it was hidden by the water. But it was almost winter, and despite that, this woman was in a river near a Scylla village, inside Scylla territory, half naked with nothing but a cloth wrapped around her chest. Given the circumstantial evidence, this conclusion could be drawn. They were a race of people with octopus tentacles for the lower halves of their bodies, and though they weren't as well adapted to being underwater as mer people, they were fine with being underwater for about half a day. Of course, it was possible that there were some Sylar who were not good at swimming. It was likely even possible that they could drown if water levels increased or they were in bad shape. But this river's water was flowing gently. Even now, there were leaves floating slowly past the woman. And most importantly, there's not the slightest reaction from my danger sense, death, Vandali murmured. This meant that the woman was harmless to Vandali, and she herself was at absolutely no risk of dying. And now that I listen to her screaming carefully, it's not screaming. For some reason, it had the intonations of a song. But then this raised the question of why she was pretending to drown in a place like this. In fantasy works on Earth, Sylar were depicted as monsters who pretended to drown and then attacked the ones who came to help them. Was this the case here? But if this was the case, there was a conspicuous lack of killing intent. So, are you going to go to her? Asked Orbia. Or are you going to ignore her? Vandali had wanted to ask Orbia about the woman, who was likely acquainted with Orbia, but for some reason, Orbia was looking at Vandali with an excited sparkling in her eyes, seemingly intending to watch what he would do next. I suppose I'll try calling out to her, said Vandali. It didn't seem that the woman needed to be saved, but it was still possible that a dangerous murderer was in these areas. It was probably best to at least speak to her. Vandali thought that it would be a pain if he were to use flight to approach her just because he didn't want to get wet, only to have her detect the use of magic and mistake him for an enemy. So he decided to manipulate threads extended from his fingers with thread reeling to move towards her as a bridge. It would look strange to see him using invisible threads as a bridge, but from the front, it would likely appear as if he was walking on the water's surface. Kaya, hello, excuse me, said Vandali, calling out to her. Could I speak to you for a moment? Kaya? The beautiful woman froze and stared at him blankly. It did indeed seem that she hadn't been drowning. Why is there a child in a place like this, walking on the river? More importantly, you just came closer to me? The woman's expression and the color of her face changed hectically. She became flustered as the former went from surprise to bewilderment, while the latter became gradually more red. She seemed greatly disturbed. Her octopus-like tentacles were squirming about around her as well. Her expression changes so easily. I'm jealous. So, she was a Sylar after all. And it seems that there are Bokugos in other worlds, too. With these thoughts running through his mind, Vandali watched the woman for a while. Are you alright? Vandali called out to her after realizing that she wasn't showing any signs of regaining her composure. Please calm down, I don't have any intention of harming you. The woman bent backwards, holding her head in her hands. You're even calling out to me? Tentacles wrapped around Vandali's torso before he could ask, what did you want me to do? Come here for a second. The woman said. And then Vandali was taken to the side of the river. What should I do? Seriously, what should I do? I was only practicing the courting ritual. According to the beautiful Sylar woman who was now clutching her head in her hands in worry, what she had been performing in the river was practice for the traditional courting ritual that was handed down among the Sylar race from generation to generation. A Sylar who wished to get married would swim, sing and dance to make the request of, someone, please marry me. If a man wanted to marry that Sylar, they would enter the water, approach the Sylar and call out to her or embrace her. Once the above procedure was followed, the proposal was established. Wow, Vandali was surprised to learn that what was considered a way of trapping prey on Earth was actually a courting ritual. Maybe Vida and others told the founder of the Sylar the stories that they heard from Zakat and the other champions, and the stories changed over time? The goddess Vida had given birth to many new races, including the Sylar, but she hadn't designed their exterior appearance and inner features beforehand. She had simply tried to give birth to strong races in order to restore the world that had been ruined by the war with the Demon King. She likely had some idea about what she was creating, but it was unlikely that she had simply decided to create black-skinned elves and women with octopus tentacles for the lower halves of their bodies. Thus, Vida had likely named the founders of the newly born races based on creatures that appeared in the myths, legends and fantasy works that she had likely once heard from the champions. Thus, the Sylar race had been named as such, and the stories told to their founders had changed into this strange courting ritual. We don't really do it that often now, though, this ritual, said Orbia, adding more details to the beautiful woman's explanation. In the distant past, there were numerous men who mistakenly thought that the Sylar were really drowning, and apparently there were arguments afterwards. Now, it's only really done by couples who have already become close, and people like this girl who do it as part of a festival's ceremony. I didn't perform this ritual with that man. In Japanese terms, this ceremony was apparently equivalent to giving each other poems before getting to know each other. I wish you told me beforehand, Vandali muttered. If he'd known, he would have called out to the woman from afar without approaching. I thought that Veda's holy son would know without being told, said Orbia. I didn't notice you. The beautiful woman protested, being unable to see Orbia's spirit and thinking that Vandali's words had been directed at her. But then she dropped her shoulders and let out a heavy sigh. But I suppose what's already been done can't be helped. It's my fault for practicing on my own because I was embarrassed, anyway. I'm Prival, a sailor from the nearby village, she said, finally introducing herself. And you? My name is Vandali. Prival is the chief's 12th daughter, said Orbia. You did it. Connections get. Vandali suppressed the urge to ask her where her tragic mood from before went. Vandali, said Prival. Well then, Van-kun, where are your mom and dad? I need to explain the courting ritual to them. Isn't it invalidated by the fact that it was an accident? Vandali asked. It's not. I'm a shrine maiden, said Prival. Well, we don't have to go as far as to get married, but I want you to help with the festival. Vandali thought it would have been fine to pretend as if it had never happened, since there hadn't been any witnesses, but Prival's position apparently made that impossible. The shrine maiden has the role of offering the courting ritual to the gods during the winter birth festival, Prival explained. The shrine maiden is supposed to choose just one person to perform the courting ritual to, but it's a rule that she mustn't choose more people. She sighed. She hadn't expected a child to be passing by in a place like that. It was decided that I would become a shrine maiden on short notice because of certain circumstances, and I might be able to do something about it, but you're a boy, aren't you? You have quite the rugged-sounding name, too. I am a boy, said Vandali. Then we can't, said Prival. I want to explain things to your parents and have you cooperate with the festival. If I can't, I'll have to explain the situation to my mother, apologize to the goddess and the other gods, and then have someone else take my position as shrine maiden. It was apparently a religious problem. Veda's religion apparently had few ceremonial procedures to begin with, but perhaps this one had been created to increase the sense of unity with the village. Wait. Was there really a white-haired child like you in one of the other villages? Where did you come from? Prival asked as she examined Vandali closely, having suddenly realized that she had never seen him before. Prival became the shrine maiden in my place, said Orbia. She was a candidate, just like me, after all. The reason Prival had become the shrine maiden on such short notice was because Orbia, who had been named as the shrine maiden, had been killed. I understand, said Vandali. I'll help you. Vandali had never been involved in religious things on Earth, but in this world, he was Veda's holy son. He was a religious figure, through and through. Since this was the case, it was probably best to cooperate with Prival and the sailor, who also worshipped Veda. It seemed that this would make Orbia happy as well. And he also wanted to do his best to spread the seeds of goodwill among the sailor race. Are you sure? Thank you. But I have to explain things to your parents first, said Prival. It's fine, said Vandali. I have an understanding mother. He had left the bone fragment that Dasa inhabited back at the camp, just in case. Ritu and the others were protecting it now. Dasa wasn't here right now, but it was probably fine. Suddenly, Vandali heard Porvina's voice. Van. Prival looked in the direction that this young voice had come from, and then froze. She's a friend, isn't she? A little girl with blonde hair that looked as if it was made of pure gold, 8 years old in appearance. However, she was nearly 2.5 meters tall. And as a precaution, she was holding a steel mace that looked as if it could kill a bear. You found a sailor-san? That's amazing, Van. Porvina waded across the river with an innocent smile on her face. It seemed that Princess Livia had hidden herself. This is Porvina, who is something like my little sister, said Vandali. I see, quite the large little sister, isn't she? Is she a half-beast person titan? Prival guessed, noticing the triangular ears protruding from Porvina's blonde hair. But she didn't realize that Porvina was a half-noble orc, though this was to be expected, as Porvina was probably the only member of her race to exist in history. Hey, I'm Prival, Prival continued, introducing herself. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, said Porvina. Van, did you tell her about Orbia and Aine? Orbia and Aine? Prival repeated. How do you know that name? 10 days ago, Orbia-san, poor Vina had let Orbia's name slip. But Orbia herself said, "I'll take it from here, so cast your spell on me." It might indeed be better for her to explain things than me, since I'm not good at talking. And since they knew each other while she was alive, it's probably fine, Vandali thought as he cast visualization. "Privil, I'm sorry that my death caused a lot of trouble for you," said Orbia. As she appeared out of thin air, Privil's eyes opened wide. With tears welling up in her eyes, Orbia's AR overcome with emotion, she tried to throw herself into Orbia's chest. "Hey?" Orbia was merely in a state of being visible to normal people, thanks to the visualization spell. She didn't have any physical form. As a result, Privil went straight through Orbia and tackled Vandali into the river. Lucky Sukabes aren't very lucky after all, Vandali thought earnestly as he fell into the river with Privil crushing him. Privil was certainly not large, if anything, she had a small build. But this only applied for the upper half of her body. There were 8 thick tentacles on the lower half of her body, each of them over 3 meters long from their roots to their tips. Her body weight was over 100 kilograms. Men and women of the resistance were running, gasping and wheezing pathetically. "Damn it, I can't do this resistance thing any longer." "You suggested it, didn't you, Hajaniki? You said that we'd be able to eat meals if we called ourselves the resistance." "Shut up. You guys didn't oppose it either." To be more precise, the men and women who had pretended to be a part of the resistance were running. They were not young people with the noble intention of fighting the invaders for the sake of their homeland, but young people who had simply never found proper work and never eaten well. Even if they wanted to be adventurers, they didn't have the confidence or the courage, nor did they have the perseverance to patiently train themselves to reach D-class, the class of adventurers that were capable of feeding themselves. But that didn't mean that they were so desperate that they would stain their hands with outrageous criminal activities. And then they had heard that villages and towns would assist them with food if they called themselves members of the resistance. They jumped at this opportunity. They wouldn't actually do anything reckless like fighting the armies of the Amid Empire and Mig Shield Nation that were occupying the lands. They would simply quietly go around to a number of villages and towns, tell resistance supporters that they were members of the resistance and have them provide a little assistance. They weren't actually participating in any resistance movements, so the enemy's army wouldn't take notice of them, and they were not stealing from the villagers by force, so the Adventurers Guild wouldn't send out an extermination request for them. Their earnings were small, but it was an easy occupation, with the only danger they had to be careful to avoid being encountering the real members of the resistance. That was what they had thought until just an hour earlier. They had been too naive in their way of thinking. They had been found by a force dispatched to exterminate the resistance, led by some noblemen of the army occupying the area. This extermination force hadn't done any investigation beforehand into things such as what the resistance had done and how much damage had actually been caused to the army. They would simply need to hunt down those who called themselves members of the resistance, and investigate these things afterwards. It would be different for the well-known groups such as the Reborn Sauron Duchy Army, led by the illegitimate child of the late Duke Sauron and his younger brother, or the Sauron Liberation Front, led by the liberating Princess Knight. But it seemed that they had no intention of spending much time on the numerous nameless resistance organizations. Damn it, they got Ben and Bix. Tommy as well. It's all your fault. My fault. Micha, you were happy as well with the fact that you wouldn't have to become a prostitute selling her body for dirt cheap. Shut up, we have to run now. As far as we can. The extermination force had ambushed the fake resistance and taken down about a third of them with archers. They had fled without being able to fight back or help their companions, leading to the current situation. There were no signs of the extermination force chasing behind them, but their fears that their pursuers would suddenly appear at any moment would not stop, so they couldn't stop running. However, they soon reached their limits. Their hearts felt as if they would snap, their breathing was wild and their legs were hot with pain. As soon as one of them stopped, unable to bear it any longer, it became a cue for the others to all stop as well and sat down on the ground. For a while, the mountain was filled only with the sound of their breathing. Despite winter being close, the sun was warm, but they were not in a state to be calmed by its rays. Where are we supposed to run? The man known as Hajaniki, who had been completely focused on running, wore a gloomy expression in response to this question from one of his companions. Damn it. If only we didn't pretend to be the resistance. This would never have resistance? Said an unfamiliar voice. Startled, Haj raised his face to see a beautiful, half-naked woman with the upper half of her body protruding from the thicket, looking down at everyone. Is that Asila? Seeing that the beautiful woman's hair and eyes were green, Haj realized that she was a Scylla. He knew that many Scylla had green hair and eyes. And the only women who would walk around a forest half naked at this time of year where winter was close were Scylla. Come to think of it, we were close to Scylla territory. I suppose we entered it without realizing. Which means, yeah, that's right. We're part of the resistance. We're being chased, please help us. He shouted. That's right, help us. Please, just for a little while, even just one night. Haj and his companions pretended to be members in the resistance once more in an attempt to grab hold of this hopeful spider's thread that had appeared before them. They were planning to flee to the Scylla's village in order to hide from the extermination force that could be chasing them. The Scylla women stared at Haj and his companions with a vacant expression for a while before answering with a lethargic tone. Resistance will help. The faces of Haj and his companions shone with hope at this response. Ah, thank you, said Haj. We owe you our lives, Goddess Sama? Right before his eyes, the branches of the thicket began to snap and break. The top half of the beautiful Scylla woman's body drew closer. But the lower half of its body was not made of the tentacles of an octopus, but the body of a serpent, thicker than a log. Amamiya? No, it's not Amamiya or a Scylla. For a moment, Haj had thought that she was a member of one of Veda's races that possessed the lower bodies of serpents, but immediately realized that he had made an unthinkable misunderstanding. The beautiful woman's lower half was connected to the body of an even thicker snake. And this woman's lower half wasn't the only one attached to the root of this snake. A dark elf with pointed ears, a merperson with gills in her sides, a harpy with wings for arms, an arachne with compound eyes on her forehead, a small dwarf, a draconid with wings growing from her back, a purple-skinned Mage and a centaur with a long mane. The upper half of these women, who were so beautiful that they would be praised if they were judged on their appearance alone, were attached to the necks of snakes. A mutant hydra? To be more precise, it was a hydra zombie created by replacing all of its severed heads with the upper halves of 9 beautiful women of different races, but this was of little importance to Haj and his companions. Resistance. The important thing for them was that the creature before them was unmistakably a monster. Run. 3 of the beautiful women were singing while the other 6 closed in on Haj and his companions. They screamed and tried to flee as fast as their legs would allow, but they had pushed their stamina to their utmost limits just moments earlier. Most of them were struggling to walk, let alone run. And then there was an ear-splitting scream, the sound of someone dying. Haj and his companions stopped in surprise and looked up to see a sensual-looking woman with abnormally large arms and legs, membranous wings extending from her back and a snake-like tail with a stinger attached to the end stretching from her waist, flying above them. There was an unfamiliar man wearing dark green clothes, white smoke rising from his body with a hissing sound as he dangled from one of the woman's hands. Letting out a terrified noise, Haj sank to the ground with tears running down his face. Mommy. Some of the other fake members of the resistance fell to their knees as well, while the others had fallen onto their backs with their limbs still flailing in an attempt to scramble away. Resistee? Resistance will help. Shelter, chased, being chased, shelter. Yamato and Rapis each conversed in faltering words that were impossible for Haj and his companions to make any sense of as they began capturing them. Hiwa. Help me. I don't want to die, I don't wait to die. Please, don't kill me, will help. Shelter, shell. The 2 of them, who had come out to guard the surrounding area, captured Haj and his companions who were crying, screaming and begging for their lives. And then they returned to the camp. Name, Yamato rank, 6 race, patchwork hydra zombie level, 0 passive skills, dark vision superhuman strength, level 3 deadly venom secretion, fangs. Level 6 magic resistance, Level 1 underwater adaptation dragon scales, Level 1 rapid regeneration, Level 7 body extension, neck, Level 3, active skills, singing, Level 3 dancing, Level 3 parallel thought processing, Level 4 scream, Level 3 monster explanation, patchwork hydra zombie, a work of art, zombie. Created by Turnisha by severing the heads of the corpse of a 9-headed mutant hydra and attaching the upper halves of the bodies of beautiful women of different races. Its modeling is spectacular, it is an embodiment of grotesque beauty. However, its ability in combat is drastically inferior to a regular hydra. The venomous fangs that are supposed to be its weapons are absent, and most of the upper bodies that have replaced the heads are lacking in defense. It is rank 6, but it only possesses the strength of a rank 4 monster. However, this is unlikely to have caused any problems, as Turnisha originally created it as a moving form of interior decoration. Naturally, as it is an artificially created creature, it is a type of undead that has not been discovered in Lambda. As long as there are no others with the same terrible tastes as Turnisha, there will be no two identical specimens. As a result of the numerous remodeling procedures that Vandali carried out after retrieving it from Turnisha's hideout, it has become able to use its numerous mouths to produce words, use its canine teeth as venomous fangs and hold objects with its arms. In other words, it was not able to do these things before undergoing surgery. Chapter 107, Lucky Sukapes Suckers. Yamato was an undead that had been created from a top-class specimen as far as 9-headed hydras went. As this fact may suggest, her main body was that of a hydra, while the upper halves of beautiful women's bodies that were attached to her necks were nothing more than decorations. Each of those bodies could speak words, had their own senses and possessed individual thinking capabilities. They could even sing and twist their bodies to dance. But the main body that their necks were attached to was a hydra. Hydras were those kinds of monsters to begin with. Each of a hydra's numerous heads contained brains, but they were merely sub-brains for controlling each head and neck. There was only one main brain at the root of the necks, controlling its thoughts and the movement of the main body. That fact didn't change even if a hydra were to become an undead. But because each of Yamato's heads could perform separate tasks with parallel thought processing, Yamato had been chosen as Vandali's secretary. Since he used out-of-body experience and spirit form transformation to multiply and perform more desk work, this was probably more efficient than to use 9 separate secretaries. However, contrary to the appearances of each of the bodies attached to Yamato's necks, she wasn't that intelligent. She was a hydra, after all. Hydras were the second most inferior race of dragons after wyverns. Even after fully developing, they were not particularly intelligent. They hadn't been examined in detail, but it was thought that their intelligence was around that of wolves. But as a result of Vandali's surgery, the leveling she had done in her spare time and her daily training, animal training, she had become able to understand words about as well as a young child. Please help the resistance. Having been given this order by Vandali, Yamato had wondered what the resistance was as she patrolled the area around the camp. Was it the name of a monster? A flower? A bird? Since she had been told to help it, she didn't think that it meant a stone or dirt. Yamato understood that she needed to help the resistance if she found them, but she didn't understand what the resistance was. Vandali had been careless. Because Yamato had the upper bodies of people, he had assumed that she had the intelligence of a person. And then Yamato found over a dozen people that she had never seen before. And these people called themselves the Resistance. They said, "Help us, and shelter us." And so she brought them back in order to help and shelter them. And Rapisage had been patrolling near Yamato, found a suspicious person who seemed to be chasing after the Resistance and killed him with her electrocution skill. After that, she brought the people of the Resistance back along with Yamato. They let the spirit of the suspicious person deliver this news to Vandali. Resistance. Shelter. I see. I have a good idea of what happened now, said Belmont. Each of Yamato's upper bodies had brought 1 or 2 people, holding their arms behind their backs, while Rapisage had returned with the corpse of a mysterious man who had been electrocuted to death. With difficulty, they had given Belmont an explanation that gave her a rough understanding of the situation. There were over a dozen members of the Resistance that Yamato and Rapisage had brought captured and dragged here. Their faces were sticky with tears and mucus, and there were even several with wet stains around their crotches. And it seemed that none of them had been able to contain their fear. They had all lost consciousness with their eyes rolled back in their heads. I'm sure they were all terribly frightened, Saria said earnestly. She actually felt sympathy for these fake Resistance members. What they had truly been scared of was Yamato and Rapisage, but Yamato and Rapisage weren't aware of this. It was likely that they had interpreted, "Don't kill me," and, "I don't want to die," as desperately wanting to be helped. That was likely why they had obeyed Vandali's orders and brought them here to help them. Jayu, they lost consciousness the moment they arrived here, said Bone Man, pitying the Resistance members. I suppose their tension reached a limit. Though this is but speculation, I suspect that seeing you was the final nail in the coffin, Bone Man, said Sam. His words were completely true. They had been captured by monsters and brought to a mysterious structure. And then they had been welcomed by a skeleton. Haj and his companions couldn't be blamed for losing consciousness. We should have been the ones to greet them, saying, "Welcome," said Rita. Well, it might have given them a little peace of mind, said Saria. At the very least, they might have been able to greet Haj and his companions without causing them to faint, so they could hear what they had to say. So, what are we doing with these people? Ritu asked, suddenly completely serious. Everyone contemplated for a while before answering. They do seem to be members of the resistance. Let us disarm them, treat their injuries and set aside a few rooms for them to rest in. Once they wake up, we should give them some food and I will listen to what they have to say, said Belmont. Perhaps changing them out of their soiled clothes should come first. This will be a considerable amount of work, Belmont thought as she swung her tail slightly from side to side. It was possible that if Haj and his companions had been conscious, their words and actions would have given away the fact that they were fake members of the resistance. But since they had all fainted, despite them being quite suspicious, there was no choice but to assume that they were indeed members of the resistance for now and shelter them. There wasn't any such thing as a document certifying one's status as a member of the resistance, after all. They seemed to lack courage for people who had supposedly devoted themselves to save their homeland from invaders, but it was likely that fighting against unidentifiable monsters took more mental preparation than fighting against other people. And conducting guerrilla warfare with the enemy army wasn't the only thing the resistance was for. It was possible that these people were members of the resistance who were specialized in information warfare, which would explain their lack of fighting strength. They could be discarded at any moment after it became clear that they weren't a part of the resistance, but if they were already discarded and later it became clear that they were actually resistance members, it would be too late. And the location of this base had become known. Either way, now that we have brought them here, we can't throw them back out, can we? Said Saria. Indeed, said Sam. Saria, Rita, please leave the care of the men to me. All right, said Rita. This kind of reminds me of when I had trouble changing Vandali's diapers, Darsa remarked. Darsa-sama, I do believe that such things are best forgotten, said Sam. Notchen groaned. Bones began rattling as the base's open gate transformed into a solid wall of bone. And then Ison and the other immortal ints creaked as they moved to place themselves in front of it. And so, just as Haj and his companions had desired, they were saved and sheltered in an impregnable fortress. Vandali received news of Yamato and Drapisage's capturing of Haj and his companions just as he was drying his soaked clothes with Princess Livia's flames after having been tackled into the river by Privel. The marks left by the suckers of Privel's tentacles stung a little. Having heard an explanation of the circumstances from Orbia's spirit, Privel had assumed that Vandali had acquired a special spiritualist job that allowed him to tame undead. Princess Livia had shown herself to Privel and given her the explanation that had caused this misunderstanding. And while Privel and Orbia were talking, Vandali had the spirit of the man electrocuted to death by Drapisage give an explanation of things as well. This scout had been a part of the Amid Empire's resistance extermination force that was stationed in a fort on the border of Sila territory. They had deliberately let the resistance, Haj and his companions, escape and then given chase to try and discover the location of their base. Behind me, there should have been one more man with me. By now, he would have returned to the fort with the rest of the unit and reported my DD death. The extermination force is 50-60? 50? The expression and eyes of the scout's spirit looked as if they were melting, and it seemed that his memories had begun melting away as well. But since Vandali still wanted to ask more questions, he poured mana into the spirit in order to preserve its spirit form, and the spirit let out a strange-sounding shout of joy. Maybe the quality of my mana changed after I acquired the Demon Guider job? I get the feeling that the reaction is more extreme than before. Well, as long as it hasn't become less effective, it's fine. Stepping back a little from the spirit's shout, Vandali continued his questioning and learned of the extermination's chain of command, numbers and the size of the garrison at the fort. As a result, he became certain that this extermination force was incapable of piercing through Notchen's defenses. In fact, with Belmond, Rita, Saria and Bone Man there, they would be repelled with ease. As for the fort that they were stationed at, Vandali would likely be able to reduce it to a mountain of rubble in a few minutes with a little barrage with dead spirit magic and his telekinesis cannon. But if we did that and a larger extermination force was dispatched after we returned to Taylorsheim, it would be really bad for the people of the Resistance and Privel Sands people, wouldn't it? Said Princess Livia. You're right, said Vandali. If it was a pack of wild monsters, exterminating them would be the end of it. But this was not true when facing an entire nation of people. It was unlikely that a large army would be dispatched right away, but it was almost certain that an investigation team of elite individuals would be sent out. That team might contain A-class adventurers and others just as powerful as them. By then, Vandali and his companions would likely no longer be here, but it would pain him to cause trouble for the resistance that was fighting to free the Sauron Duchy. It would simply be too irresponsible. But it is difficult for us to stay here and continue fighting, too, said Princess Livia. You're right, said Vandali. Making a move here might cause trouble for the resistance in its own way. Despite how irresponsible it was to leave things as they were, it was also hard to choose to ally themselves with the resistance and continue fighting with them. The fact was, most of Vandali's allies were undead. Believers of Veda were tolerant towards undead, but that tolerance was merely dealing with self-conscious undead by encouraging them to pass on to their next lives rather than exterminating them with no questions asked. It wasn't the kind of tolerance that treated undead as creatures to be befriended unconditionally. In fact, the undead that appeared in the wild were just as dangerous to people as other monsters. The resistance would be fighting alongside these dangerous undead. If the Amid Empire discovered this, wouldn't they spread an extraordinarily persuasive propaganda that the resistance had sold their souls to an evil god? And if Andali were to draw too much attention and cause too much noise as the second coming of the Demon King or whatever else, it was possible that S-class adventurers such as the Thunderclap Schneider or the Blue-Flamed Sword Heinz would join forces, overcoming the boundaries of nations for the sake of saving the world. If Heinz was on his own, Vandali might have a chance for vengeance, but if his party members were included and even another S-class adventurer were to enter the picture, Vandali would be in trouble. Vandali was still unaware that Schneider was actually a believer of Veda and a potential ally. With that said, there were too many moral problems with throwing out or concealing the existence of the resistance members that Yamato and Rapisage had saved. So then, the most realistic option was, once the extermination force comes, we'll take a few of them alive and use my brainwashing to alter their memories and have them believe that they were attacked by undead. I'll use the ones that we killed to create the undead. If we send a few dozen of Nochen's skeletons towards the fort after releasing the brainwashed survivors, I suppose the enemy army will think that it was the doing of wild undead? There was also the option of capturing all of them alive and using the mental encroachment skill to brainwash them, and Vandali needed to go to the Sila village. This would be the appropriate method to use if the extermination force were to reach the camp while he was doing that. Well, it will be all right, won't it? Said Princess Livia. Normally, nobody would try to analyze the actions of skeletons and zombies anyway. Hearing her reassure him, Vandali wrote on a piece of paper that he had received the message, and wrote his own reply on it as well before surreptitiously giving it to an undead insect to carry. Now then, let's get going, said Privel, having finished talking to Orbia. Now, she would lead Vandali to the Sila village and have him meet her mother, who was the chief. Huh? A rhinoceros beetle at this time of year? She blinked as she saw the undead insect flying away. Haven't you mistaken it for another kind of insect? Vandali suggested. It was probably best to not forget the seasons when choosing undead insects to deliver messages from now on. The Sila village was a gathering of huts built at a marsh at the foot of the mountain. There were sturdy huts built along the marsh's bank, designed for the Sila whose lower bodies and tentacles weigh more than one would expect from their appearance, and there were also boathouse-like buildings floating on the marsh where the humans and beast people of the village apparently lived. To the distrustful eye, it might have seemed that the Sila were keeping the men in captivity, but the truth was that they were protecting the men. There aren't any devil's nests here, so the deep parts of the marshes are safe, said Privel. When they want to leave, they can row boats, have us carry them or even swim themselves. That was how it was, apparently. Incidentally, Vandali had wondered whether there were any crocodiles and such since it was a swamp, but the reply was, there are, and they're delicious. They were apparently the main prey for Sila hunters. The Sila also fished and used large, capybara-like rodents about the size of calves and ducks as livestock to get by, worshipping their main goddess Veda as well as Marie Vale, the heroic goddess of the Sila. I want ducks, said Vandali. Those big rat-like things look tasty as well, Van, said Porvina. I'd like a share of those as well. But I'm sure they'd become monsters if we raised them in Talersheim, wouldn't they? I wonder if the quality of their meat would change. While the two of them admired the way the enormous capybaras and ducks were being cultivated, Privel was standing nearby, being scolded by Sila guards who were equipped with spears and armor made of shells. Sneaking out without permission. I understand that you want to practice, but it's dangerous right now. At least ask us to escort you. I'm sorry. But listen, we might be able to find out who killed Orbia-san and the others, said Privel. The guard Anisans had noticed Porvina and Vandali, whom Privel had brought back with her. Princess Livia was keeping herself hidden so as not to cause panic, but they seemed to have thought that the enormous, 2-meter-tall girl was an important person. They gave a hesitant glance towards poor Vina, but Privel corrected them. "No, the smaller one," she said. "The smaller one? It's alive? I was sure that it was a doll. How horrible. It's true that poor Vina is holding me up with both hands, but I'm actually talking," Vandali thought. "Hello, my name is Vandali," he said, introducing himself. "I'm poor Vina, his little sister," said poor Vina. "Little sister, huh?" The guards seemed surprised, but fortunately, they didn't seem to be repulsed. In Sila villages, children of all kinds of mixed blood were born. Though there weren't any in this village right now, in the past, there had apparently been Sila with the small upper bodies of dwarves, the large ones of titans, and even some with beast ears on their heads. The non-Sila people in the village were those such as half-elves who had been unable to fit into society as well, so such Sila were not subject to discrimination. Also, for some reason, it seemed that Sila were affected by Vandali's demon path enticement. It was possible that the fact that they used tentacles to crawl placed them under the insect user category. Perhaps they could be equipped. But in any case, poor Vina stood out, so she couldn't exactly be ignored. And so Privel introduced Vandali as a special spiritualist who would help resolve the incident with Orbia and took him to the chief. At first, the chief seemed skeptical of Vandali despite her daughter's introduction, but once Vandali showed her Orbia's spirit with visualization, that changed completely. "Orbia, you are. Even you're doing this, chief." Overcome with emotion, the chief tried to embrace Orbia's spirit. Having had a good idea that this was going to happen, Vandali had escaped immediately. The chief crashed through the wall of the hut and dived into the swamp. "Mother!" Privel shouted. "What happened?" the Sila guards asked as they rushed over. "It seems that Sila people like embracing each other," said poor Vina. "It might be that they are easily overcome with emotion," said Vandali. "Come to think of it, I do like hugs," said Orbia. "I hug all my family and friends to greet them." Immediately after this conversation, the Sila guards were overcome with emotion at the sight of Orbia and tried to embrace her as well. They passed straight through her and followed after the chief, taking Vandali with them. "Van, you can't let your guard down," said poor Vina. Vandali was full of openings against attacks with no killing intent that posed no danger to his life. For the second time today, he experienced being smothered by beautiful women's lower bodies, tentacles. "Ahem. I have embarrassed myself," said the Sila chief. "We're very sorry," said the two Sila guards in apology. "Oh no, please don't worry about it," said Vandali, whose forehead and cheeks were covered in sucker marks. After this apology had taken place, the two Sila guards went to stand guard and make sure that nobody else entered the chief's house. "If you get any more wet, you'll catch a cold, Van," said poor Vina. "There is a limit to me drying him, too," said Princess Livia. And the conversation wouldn't go anywhere, either, poor Vina added. And so, a gag order had been placed on the existence of Orbia's spirit. Still, to think that a spiritualist would allow us to meet Orbia again. "I was still half in doubt when Privel told me this," said Perivale, Privel's mother. Perivale was a woman who looked to be in her mid-20s. If one took Privel and turned her into an adult, expanded her chest threefold, increased the size of her tentacles and made her body's surface glossier, she might resemble Perivale. Silo apparently stopped aging in appearance completely past a certain point, so Perivale and Privel might have appeared to be sisters at first glance, but it seemed that having 12 children had granted Perivale a calm air about her. Considering her actions just moments earlier, this calm air wasn't entirely perfect, however. "When I heard that Privel had brought a half-beast person Titan girl and a white child with her, the day after we heard a hurricane dragon's roar, I did suspect something," said Perivale. "What do you mean?" Vandali asked. "I kept it quiet from everyone, but I received a divine message from Marie Vale, you see." While being this village's chief, Perivale was also a priestess who had received the divine blessing of Marie Vale, the heroic goddess of the Sila. She had previously received a divine message from Marie Vale, "Welcome the white half-vampire." "So you expected that this was me?" Vandali asked. "That's right," said Perivale. "This is my first time seeing a damper." "But you're completely white, aren't you?" This was apparently one of the reasons that Perivale had welcomed Vandali and Porvina into the village. It seemed that she had some idea as to where Vandali had come from. Since he had appeared on the day after the Sila had heard a hurricane dragon's roar, she suspected that he had come from across the mountain range. After all, the heroic goddess had gone out of her way to deliver a divine message about him, so it was unlikely that he was an ordinary person. So, Orbia, what were you doing alone in a place like that? You don't remember anything? Asked Perivale. I can't tell you why I was there, Orbia replied. And I don't remember anything about how I was killed. You can't tell me? Ah, a clandestine meeting, said Perivale, seemingly having guessed Orbia's circumstances. It was possible that such circumstances were not rare for Scylla. But you can't remember, huh? Well, it's unfortunate that there are no clues, but maybe it's better that way. I was killed in quite a horrible way, wasn't I? Said Orbia. More importantly, Chief, was there anyone who was killed with me? And wasn't there a ring on my finger? No, there weren't any others where we found your remains, said Perivale. And you weren't wearing a ring, either. I see. It seemed that the corpse of Orbia's lover hadn't been discovered, but nothing had been confirmed, so she couldn't feel relieved. He might have been taken somewhere before being killed. Judging from what you're saying, it seems that your good person isn't someone who is known in the village, is he? Do you know anything about this, boy? Perivale asked Vandali. At the very least, there weren't any spirits other than Orbia's at the marsh we found her, Vandali replied. This much was certain, because if there had been any spirits nearby, they would have been drawn to Vandali by his demon path enticement skill. That was why Vandali thought that there was a high chance that Orbia's lover was alive, but it was also possible that he had already returned to the circle of transmigration, so he couldn't say anything careless. I see, then it seems that he will likely be fine for now. That person was brave enough to have a clandestine meeting with you in a marsh with nobody around. You do have some kind of idea as to how strong he is, don't you? Said Perivale. Of course. Orbia said indignantly. That person's skill with a sword, Orbia-san, are you sure about this? Asked Privel. If you say too much, we'll be able to tell who it is. Oops, that was close. The sorrow disappeared from Orbia's expression, as if she were feeling relieved. In a similar way Perivale and Privel's expressions grew brighter as well. It seemed that they were relieved at the fact that Orbia appeared exactly as she had been when she was alive, despite having been killed in a cruel way. They were disappointed that there were no new clues about the murders, but it was only natural for people to not want to see their friends' faces drowning in sorrow or twisting in hatred. Could I hear about the murder incidents? Asked Vandali. Yes, though it's a bit of a long story, said Perivale. According to her story, incidents where Scylla from each of the villages were attacked and killed in places where they were alone had been occurring in this Scylla territory for the past half-year. They would go out to hunt and gather, end up chasing their prey too far, get separated from their companions and then vanish, only to turn up the next day in a completely different state. All of the corpses had been left in mostly the same state, so all the tribes believed that it was the work of the same criminal. There had already been 5 victims, including Orbia. With her death, 1 member of each tribe had been killed. We do have an idea of who it is, said Perivale. We are thinking that it's the work of elder extremists who can't accept our peace plan with the Mid Empire. Peace plan? Vandali repeated. To be more accurate, it's something like a non-aggression pact. They told us that they will guarantee our right to govern ourselves in exchange for paying slightly higher taxes than we did when this place was still known as the Sauron Duchy, Perivale explained. Of course, our worshipping of Vida-sama and Marivale will stay the same as well. Surprisingly, the Amid Empire was apparently not trying to suppress the Scylla with military might and make them suffer under tyrannical rule. According to Perivale, though she hadn't seen this with her own eyes, the same likely applied for the entirety of what used to be the Sauron Duchy. The people had been promised that they could keep planting rice for harvestable crops rather than being forced to switch to wheat. Their taxes remained the same as what they had been paying to Duke Sauron, and some regions with taxes that were too high had even had them lowered. The people were being encouraged to convert from Veda's religion, but Perivale hadn't heard of anything suggesting that people were being held and tortured in refugee camps. I was sure that the Empire would declare that they wouldn't consider those who don't swear loyalty to them as inhuman and conduct a massacre, said Porvina. I would have imagined that the churches of Vita would be destroyed along with the believers who tried to protect them, and those who resisted would be whipped and forced into labor to erect churches of Elder, said Princess Livia. I can see that you people hate the Amid Empire more than we do, said Perivale. She and Privel shuddered a little. Incidentally, Perivale had already been convinced in regards to Princess Livia. How surprising, a spiritualist who can tame undead, she had said. The reality was different, but with the divine message in the fact that there was a special spiritualist boy right in front of her who had brought an undead that was capable of such ordinary conversation, she seemed satisfied with this explanation. And though demon path enticement's effects were much milder on Scylla compared to undead, it was still effective. They thought favorably of Vandali, so they believed him without question. Well, that's how it is, said Vandali. He was satisfied with ProDigal's explanation. He had imagined that it was possible that the Empire would conduct a massacre, but he had thought it was more likely that they would maintain their occupation of the land under moderate conditions and then try to turn it into a part of their own territory. Since the people of the Empire and its vassal nations couldn't be made to move to the Sauron region in large numbers, there was no choice but to hold it under moderate conditions. And in this world, where the existence of gods was clearly known, the heavens would restrain them if they did anything too unreasonable. Things might have been different if the inhabitants of the Sauron Duchy were all members of Vida's races just like Talesheim. But although many of the inhabitants worshipped Vida, there were humans, dwarves and elves as well. And though they were few in number, some worshipped Aldo as well. But I cannot understand why they are treating everyone so reasonably, said Vandali. About that, I think there are all kinds of circumstances, but well, maybe it just wouldn't be worth it for them to attack us, said ProDigal. Our territory has a lot of mountains and not a lot of flat ground. There are a lot of ponds and marshes, too. It would be difficult to attack with people alone, and it would be inconvenient for them to live here, said Prival. This Scylla territory, which was adjacent to the boundary mountain range, was mostly made up of mountains and stretches of wetlands. And Scylla were as proficient as they appeared at fighting in wetlands, in water and on water surfaces. And they moved more comfortably on dry land than their appearances would suggest. In fact, since they had 8 legs, they were much more stable on slopes than 2-legged people. And they were generally strong. They possessed the superhuman strength skill from birth, so their long, flailing tentacles of the lower halves of their bodies were more than enough of a threat. Of the lower halves of their bodies were more than enough of a threat to ordinary soldiers. Their bodies were large and it was as if they were constantly riding mounts. 5 infantrymen would be needed to hold back a Scylla with a spear. And all Scylla had combat-related skills such as unarmed fighting technique that they regularly used against the crocodiles that they hunted, so there were no non-combatants other than very young children. To top things off, they had no real weak points. At a glance, one might think that their upper bodies, which were no different from those of people, to be a weakness, but their thin arms were certainly affected by their superhuman strength and unarmed fighting technique skills. And since they had hands of the same shape as people, they could make masterful use of weapons such as bows, spears and swords. And the frightening thing was that the tentacles of the lower halves of their bodies were capable of moving on their own to some extent. Thus, it was possible for Scylla to aim at a distant enemy with a bow and arrow using the arms of her upper body while strangling a nearby enemy to death with her tentacles. Wow, they wriggle in the same way, but they're even more amazing than your tongue, Van, said Porvina. No, I think that's amazing in its own way, said Orbia. ProDigal blinked. Tongue? Leaving that aside, please continue your explanation, said Vandali. There were a total of 5,000 Scylla living in the 5 villages in this territory. Doing a simple calculation, 25,000 infantrymen would be needed to assault this area. Even if such large amounts of military funds and men were sacrificed, the land they would obtain would yield little in the way of agriculture as it contained many mountains and marshes, and an unimaginable amount of cultivation would need to be done in order to live in it unless the people would be content to rely on hunting and gathering alone. There were the Scylla's terraced rice fields, but these couldn't be maintained without the appropriate knowledge. And there weren't any devil's nests that could be accessed without climbing into the treacherous boundary mountain range other than one in the middle of a wide marshland. There was also a single dungeon, but the inside was entirely made of wetlands, rivers and large lakes, making it difficult to clear for those other than Scylla. Therefore, it would be difficult to make a living by harvesting the products of monsters and dungeons. Thus, the Empire stood to gain little from attacking this territory other than the satisfaction of the people of the Church of Alda, who were taught that it was justice to exterminate the members of Vida's races that originated from monsters. That was why they had settled things with negotiations. And so, ProDigal seemed to think that radical believers of Alda, who could not accept this peace plan, were conducting this series of murders in order to provoke the Scylla into rejecting the peace plan of their own accord. Several people with the skills of D-class adventurers would be enough to dispose of a Scylla who was on her own. But won't they try doing various things in the future, such as demanding that you pay more taxes? Asked Vandali. Well, they probably will, said ProDigal. I think they're planning all kinds of things, like breaking the bonds between the villages. Everyone knows that, but if we oppose them directly, the Empire would end up wiping us out whenever they want to. We're accepting the peace plan for now to buy time while we look for a new place to live. We're trying all kinds of things. Maybe the Orborn Kingdom will take the Sauron Duchy back. The Scylla had not cast aside their wariness of the Amid Empire. They acknowledged the difference in power and were searching for a way to survive. But Vandali could feel that they weren't expecting much from the Orborn Kingdom that they had once belonged to. Wasn't the Orborn Kingdom the motherland of the Scylla race? So, you said that you'll investigate the incidents if we give you seeds and pairs of ducks and huge capybaras in return, but what will you do today? ProDigal asked. The sun is setting soon, and the places where the remains of the other victims were found are quite far away. Well then, could you please show me Orbiasan's remains? If they are still around, that is, said Vandali. Yes, that's fine. We bury our dead in the marshes, so they should still be there. Orbia was found 5 days ago. But ProDigal hesitated. Are you going to look at them? She asked, warning him that Orbia was in a terrible state. This normally wouldn't be something to show to a child. It will be fine. His Mage Vandali Khan is accustomed to these things, said Princess Livia. Ah, come to think of it, he's a spiritualist, isn't he? Then it's all right, I suppose? ProDigal seemed a little unsure, but she gave instructions to one of the Scylla guards to tell her that they should lead him to the body. Well then, I will be going, said Vandali. We'll be back, said Porvina. Porvina, you stay here with Orbiasan and Princess Livia. Eh? The investigation into the Scylla serial killing incident began with an autopsy. Name, Rapesage rank, 6 race, Neo-Patchwork zombie level, 0 passive skills, dark vision rapid regeneration, level 6, level up. Deadly poison secretion, tail, level 6, level up. Physical resistance, level 5, level up. Magic resistance, level 4, level up. Superhuman strength, level 6, level up. Active skills, electrify, level 4, level up. High-speed flight, level 3, level up. Unarmed fighting technique, level 4, level up. Whip technique, level 2, level up. Surpass limits, level 5, new. Coordination, level 1, new. Chapter 108, The History of the Scylla Race. The Scylla guards, who could see in the dark, guided Vandali to the marsh that they used as a graveyard, where he dug up Orbia's corpse. "Oh wandering spirits," Vandali said, reciting a fake incantation. But it was actually Mudgellums created from the mud of the marsh with his Golem transmutation skill that was digging up the corpse. It's as if the mud of the marsh is alive. So, spiritualists can do these kinds of things as well. The Scylla guards held their breaths as the mud crawled and a mud-stained corpse surfaced. When they had been asked, they had explained that spiritualists were rare here as well. There had been a few in the past, but there hadn't been a Scylla spiritualist in the last 1,000 years or so. That was why they never pointed out that this wasn't the work of a spiritualist. And fortunately, this allowed Vandali to use unknown skills while fooling them. Vandali began the autopsy on Orbia's corpse. But several days had passed since the Scylla funeral of burying her in the marsh had been conducted. The lingering memories had faded and Vandali wasn't able to learn much even if DNA and fingerprints were present. The technology to detect and compare them wasn't there, so he hadn't been expecting evidence like this to begin with. However, Orbia's corpse itself was in good condition. Decomposition had been suppressed. The state that it had been in when it was buried seemed to have been preserved. Vandali had the feeling that there had been cases on Earth where corpses buried in mud were discovered as mummies. It was possible that a similar thing was happening here. But as Vandali removed the cloth wrapped around the corpse, he saw that it was in a state that could only be described as dreadful. "This is quite terrible," he said. There were deep cuts all over the body, and the damage to the chest and lower body was particularly severe. Both breasts were in pieces, bearing no semblance to their original shape, and all of the tentacles of the lower half of the body had been severed. And the holy symbol of Elder had been branded onto the body. Apparently, she was found tied to the trunk of a tree growing near the marsh and put on display in this state, said one of the guards. Most of the parts that were cut off were likely taken away by beasts. We couldn't find them. Fortunately, other than that, they seemed to have only nibbled at her a little, but, apparently, The breasts were a symbol of life for women who believed in Veda, and the tentacles on the lower half of the body were a symbol of Marie Vale, the Scylla who became a goddess in the Age of the Gods. In other words, the criminals were deliberately destroying the bodies of the Scylla in a way that would strip them of their dignity. The symbol of Alda that had been branded into the body and the arrows that were still protruding from the corpse were apparently those used by the Amid Empire's extermination forces. If I was a detective on Earth, I would think it's suspicious because there's too much evidence gathered here, but this was clearly a murder that had been carried out to set an example and to provoke the Scylla. If the criminals had no intention of concealing their identities, there was no need to worry about there being too much evidence. So, do you think you can figure something out? One of the guards asked. Well, I'll try, said Vandali. He touched the corpse and extended his spirit form to scan the inside of the body. No fatal wounds on the skull. The arrows didn't hit the important organs. Is it one of the cuts that caused her death? To Vandali's surprise, he found that the cause of death wasn't clear. If there had been any vital reactions, if only he could figure out whether the wounds had been inflicted before death or afterwards. Have you managed to figure something out? When you let us see Orbia again, honestly, we were quite relieved to see her looking like that. We'd thought that she might have gone through this horrible treatment while she was still alive. But it was good to see Orbia looking as lively as she was when she was alive. Vandali remained silent as the Scylla guards talked to him. They were distracting him a little, but thanks to them, he suddenly realized something. Now that you mention it, Orbia doesn't remember anything about the moment she died. At first, Vandali had simply thought that Orbia's memories had faded from the shock, but she remembered too little for this to be the case. Even when spirits lost their memories from psychological shock, their spirit forms would be distorted or they would display unnatural behaviors, such as being afraid of something. But Orbia hadn't shown anything like this. Vandali only had a few years' worth of experience of observing living humans, but including the time from his second life, he had around 30 years of experience of observing the dead. There was no doubt about it. So then, this meant that Orbia hadn't forgotten due to psychological shock, but really did not remember anything about the moment of her death. With that being the case, the first scenario that came to mind was that she had received a blow to her head that had knocked her unconscious instantly, but Vandali already knew that there were no deep wounds to the skull or brain. Her head, undamaged. Cervical vertebrae, undamaged. The other organs are quite wounded, but they're organs that wouldn't cause instantaneous death. The lower half of the body contains nerves and muscles, but there aren't any organs other than what appears to be subbrains at the roots of the tentacles. It is possible that I can't find it because I don't know much about Scylla biology. Excuse me, Vandali said to the Scylla guards. Please touch my head and stay still for a while. The two Scylla guards seemed confused, but they placed their hands on Vandali's head as they were told. Your head? Like this? We just need to stay still in this position? Yes, just like that, said Vandali. This might feel unpleasant, but please bear with me. Eh? Ha, you. Something's coming inside? Vandali had his spirit form invade the Scylla guards' bodies from the place they were touching him. Since Scylla biology was even more different from the humans of Earth or origin than ghouls and beast people, he was having these two cooperate in helping him understand it. Their upper bodies are fundamentally similar to Homo sapiens, just as I thought. Along with their organ function, I suppose everything is the same other than the composition of their lungs? The stomach of the Anisan on the right is in rough shape. I'll fix that. Vandali gained a rough understanding of Scylla biology while performing a little service for the suffering Scylla guards in return, but he still hadn't discovered any clues on the cause of Orbia's death. He investigated Orbia's corpse one more time and found that there was one unnatural wound. Her finger? There was a small wound on Orbia's left ring finger, as if it had been pricked by a needle. It was a small, shallow wound, but before Orbia's death, she had received a ring from her secret lover. Just in case, Vandali read the memories that lingered on the corpse. Orbia must have been incredibly happy. Her body hadn't been preserved by cursed ice or magic, but a vivid image had still remained. It was the vivid image of Orbia's own left hand with a ring on her ring finger. The secret lover was blurred and Vandali couldn't see him properly, but he did manage to see the characteristic bangs. I can't say for sure without seeing the ring as evidence, but I have a feeling that a sickening truth is waiting for us, said Vandali. The lover who had given Orbia the ring was suspicious. It was highly possible that he had placed poison in the ring and poisoned Orbia. However, perhaps because too much time had passed, Vandali couldn't find the poison in Orbia's corpse. Vandali couldn't tell if the ring in question did indeed contain such a trick from the image of the lingering memory alone. It was possible that Orbia's lover was innocent and the wound on her finger was by coincidence from a thorn pricking her or something that day. It was also entirely possible that the murderers, who had concealed Orbia's cause of death, had simply fired arrows coated in extremely fast-acting poison. Vandali didn't know whether he should tell Orbia about this at this point in time. "What should I do?" he sighed. "Ugh, what did you do? I have a warm feeling in my stomach." "Are you finished already?" "You're finished, right?" Vandali finally took notice of the two Scylla guards, who had lost their balance and collapsed onto the ground because of him. Kurt Ligston, a man from the Mage Shield Nation who was the commandant of this fort at the boundary of the Scylla territory, had been listening to Captain Mardok's report for a while with a gloomy look on his face. He was the third son of Earl Ligston, though Earl Ligston's eldest son was the current head of the family, so as his younger brother, he was serving as a member of the branch family. "So, you are currently continuing the plan of deliberately allowing the resistance to escape and then finding their base?" he asked. "That is correct." Mardok's words were courteous, but he was looking at Kurt with a disagreeable expression. He was a shrewd man. In fact, it was likely that he would complete his work flawlessly. "The resistance members that we are targeting are unskilled. Once we locate their base, we will likely exterminate them within a few days," Mardok continued. He was the commanding officer of the Anti-Resistance Extermination Squad, appointed by the headquarters of the army occupying the region. He was staying in this fort in order to exterminate the resistance organizations of the Sauron region that the army couldn't handle. The social position of Kurt's family and his military rank were higher, but Mardok looked down on him for a certain reason. And though Kurt found this unpleasant, he had accepted it, knowing that it couldn't be helped. Mardok was someone whom the upper brass of the army expected results from. He was the captain of an exceptional unit that had already exterminated a number of resistance organizations. On the other hand, though Kurt was the third son of the Ligston family that once served as Marshal of the Mage Shield Nation, he was a commander who had been demoted. The expedition into the Boundary Mountain Range had ended in complete failure. The fact that his older brother Chezer had died was, considering that over half of the expedition army had returned as undead, was the only happy thing about it. But Kurt himself hadn't been involved in the expedition. So officially, he had received no punishment. But for the reasons of having him take joint responsibility and tightening the discipline of the other men, Kurt had been sent away from his homeland and stationed at this unimportant fort. This fort was one that had been constructed before the founding of the Orborn Kingdom, when this region was known as the Sauron Kingdom. The statesmen at the time had acknowledged that the Scylla had the right to govern themselves, but they had decided to build a barrier and this fort just in case. But as long as the Scylla race didn't decide to start some reckless rebellion, the military value of this fort was essentially nil. The Amid Empire's noblemen that were in charge of foreign affairs were conducting negotiations, so such a rebellion was unlikely to happen. In other words, Kurt was essentially a commanding officer for guards who had only been stationed here just in case. He had received a letter from Marshal Palpapek back at home that read, "I want you to think of this as a vacation and enjoy this until things blow over." So he believed that he would one day return to his original position and continued serving day after day without feeling dispirited. But, Marshal Dono, I do not need any vacation that I must spend in the company of such an unpleasant man. Kurt wanted a change of occupations right this instant, even if it meant being a low-ranking soldier on the front lines, but he couldn't let this show in his behavior, so he endured it firmly. However, he finally let some unnecessary words slip from his mouth. "But no matter how many of such people you capture, is it not rather meaningless if you do not capture those of the reborn Sauron army you capture? Is it not rather meaningless if you do not capture those of the reborn Sauron army and the Sauron Liberation Front?" he said. But Mardok's disagreeable smile grew deeper rather than stiffening. Indeed, the leader of the reborn Sauron army, Duke Sauron's illegitimate son, Paris. His younger brother who is the vice-captain, Rick. The Princess Knight of the Sauron Liberation Front. Capturing these people would be a most spectacular victory, he said. However, the important thing is for us to make our achievements of capturing members of the resistance known to the people of the Sauron region. This would cause the people's hopes in the resistance to fade and decrease their desire to start rebellions. The people needed to be taught that remaining quiet and submissive was more beneficial to them than taking part in short-lived rebellions. And there has been information that resistance organizations have been gathering in this area, Mardok continued. It is likely that they do not want the Scylla to accept the terms we offered in the negotiations. It is only a matter of time before my unit captures the Duke's illegitimate child and the Princess Knight and is given the honor of executing them, he declared. the narcissism audible in his tone. Kurt thought about how much he wanted Marduk to be beaten into silence as he spoke again. That is quite fine. But this is an important time period, where our negotiations will either be accepted or refused. Even if it is to exterminate the resistance, I request that you be very mindful of the Scylla territory. Naturally, as a nobleman of the Mage Shield nation, which was a vassal nation of the Amid Empire, Kurt was a believer of Alder. However, he was a military man before he was an Alder worshipper. The orders of his superiors were absolute. Since those superiors had decided that the Scylla would be negotiated with rather than fought, he had no objections to obeying those orders. Interfering with them was out of the question. That was why he feared that Marduk's unit might make conspicuous moves too close to the Scylla territory, and this would be interpreted by the Scylla as a threat, causing disagreements during the negotiations. Of course, Marduk was a military man himself, belonging to the same army. There was no way that he was unaware of the negotiations with the Scylla, but Kurt was reminding him just in case. Oh? Could it be that the powerful military man of the Mage Shield nation is timid when dealing with these octopus women? This was Marduk's response. Octopus women was extremely insulting to the Scylla race. These were not words that a military man should be speaking during these times of negotiation, much less on duty. Marduk Dono, I request that you show some earnest caution, said Kurt. He didn't know what kind of personal values Marduk held or what he thought of the Scylla, but if he were to do something, it would be Kurt who would receive punishment for his subordinates' actions. He tried to ask Marduk one more time, but there is no need to worry. He got in response completely failed to reassure him. After Marduk left the room, Kurt, who was supposed to be younger than Marduk, had a bitter expression on his face and suddenly looked very old. If negotiations break down and the Scylla leave their territory to attack us, our army would win. But what are you planning to do if you anger them carelessly and they confine us in this fort? Can the higher-ups in the army not put a leash on these mad dogs that think of nothing but raising their own achievements? He cursed. The Scylla race had been living in the marshes in these mountains long before the foundation of the Sauron kingdom that preceded the Sauron Duchy. They had turned the inconvenient, steep slopes into terraced rice fields and made their living through farming and gathering. They had made no attempts to expand their territory into the pleasant, flat land on the outside. That was because this was the strategy that the Scylla had adopted in order to survive. Nations had started holy wars led by the Church of Alder, invaded because they wanted more land, and even started wars to try and capture the beautiful Scylla women as slaves. Each time, the Scylla had fought in the marshes where human armies were at a disadvantage, and when they could not hold out even by fighting like this, the families had separated and fled into the mountains. And then they would wait years or decades, and as the enemy failed to make use of the Scylla's land, they would attack and take them back. The first king Sauron had acknowledged the right for Scylla to rule themselves for the first time, welcomed the Scylla chief's daughter at the time as his concubine, and sent them his youngest son for marriage. The great-grandchild of the king's youngest son is Perivale-san? No. My newest husband, and Orbia over there. Huh? While Vandali was conducting the autopsy on Orbia's corpse, Porvina and the others were listening to the story of the Scylla race's history, told by Perivale, the village's chief. In other words, I'm the great-great-grandchild of the princess, and Orbia's son is my aunt, said Prival. Wait a minute, your father isn't my brother. We're cousins. I'm not your aunt, said Orbia. Scylla were a race with long lifespans of 400 years, so stories from a few hundred years ago were stories of their ancestors of a not-so-distant past for them. And since they were a unisexual race of women, they married men of other races, but apparently half of their children were born as members of the father's race. Girls were born as Scylla while boys were born as members of the father's race. It was easy to understand. There were exceptions, but these were miraculously rare, occurring only once every few thousand years. Then Orbias-san and Prival-san, if these were normal times, you might be princesses, said Princess Livia. Perivale gave a cynical smile. Well, if this land had continued being ruled by people like the first king, she said. The Scylla had been guaranteed their right to govern themselves and become blood relatives of royalty, but a few years after his death, the Scylla chief's daughter, who had been his concubine, and the daughters she had given birth to were sent back to the Scylla territory by the new king's order. Of course, they were forced to abandon their right to succeed the throne. The Scylla race was still allowed to govern themselves after that, even after the Sauron kingdom became the Sauron Duchy, but they were also forbidden from coming out of their territory. Their existence was acknowledged, but nothing else was. That was the position the nation had taken. Thanks to that, The only people who come into our territory from the outside are merchant caravans with permits, adventurers who have received requests and civil officials who come to perform inspections," said ProDigal. "Some of them choose to stay, but this ends up quite inconvenient for them." "That can't be!" Princess Livia exclaimed, looking shocked. Wasn't Vida's religion flourishing in the Sauron Duchy? Were the important people influenced by Alda's religion again? Asked poor Vina, who seemed puzzled. "Well, even for Vida's religion, there are a lot of things to it," ProDigal replied. "Though they're not as bad as Alda, some sects discriminate against races such as Scylla and Lamias because we possess monster blood. Well, I get the feeling that the one who was chief when I was a child told me that it was for political reasons that they suddenly changed their attitude, not religious ones. During the rule of the second king, his influential supporters had hated the fact that the previous king's Scylla princesses, who had long lifespans, would remain influential in the royal palace for a long time." ProDigal vaguely recalled being told something like that. The second king had insisted that it was not his intention to treat his sisters who had been born to different mothers and their entire race with callousness, and as proof, he had provided all kinds of assistance with the Scylla territory, but the third king and the kings after that had simply kept their distance from the Scylla. There might have been movements that would have seen the Scylla who possessed royal blood restored to the throne, or assassinated instead out of fear, if a coup d'etat or revolution had occurred. But the Sauron kingdom's rule had remained stable. An enormous enemy nation, the Amid Empire, had been founded, and the Sauron kingdom became a duchy of the Orborn kingdom, but the changing of statesmen itself had been carried out smoothly. The nation was occupied by the enemy now, but nobody saw the value in the king's bloodline from hundreds of years ago. So the treatment of the Scylla hadn't changed. "And other than having to find husbands, this isn't bad treatment for us," said Privel. "You're trapped in here, but it's not bad treatment?" poor Vina asked. Privel nodded. "Yeah, there are some inconveniences from being trapped inside, but it's been peaceful for hundreds of years. Members of the Scylla race were strictly forbidden from leaving their territory, but in exchange, they were not conscripted into the army. Even while the Sauron army had been fighting against the Amid Empire's invading force, the Scylla had been living carefree lives here, cultivating rice and hunting crocodiles and fish. The taxes became a little higher during times of war, but looking at it another way, that was the only burden the Scylla faced. Their workers were not being taken away from them, so all they needed to do was hunt and fish a little more than usual. From the Scylla race's point of view, this was perfect as they wouldn't have to become involved in the restless society of humans, and as long as they paid their taxes, they could avoid being invaded as they had been in the past. Do you not ever think that you would like to go out into the society outside?" Princess Livia asked. "No, not really," said Privel. "I've heard stories, but wouldn't human-sized cities be inconvenient? I am interested, but not enough to make the effort to actually go out there, I suppose," said ProDigal. "That person said that he wanted to spend the rest of his life here, to wait, that was supposed to be a secret," said Orbia. The Scylla didn't have much interest in the outside world. They seemed to be a race that enjoyed the slow life. The Sauron Duchy and the Scylla race's territory had maintained a dry relation, like one between a landlord and a tenant, so even when the Amid Empire had occupied the duchy, they hadn't felt any desire to fight for their neighbors. Their attitude of treating it as someone else's business, the attitude that Vandali had questioned, was the reason behind this. The Scylla didn't care who ruled the Sauron region as long as no trouble was caused for them. Incidentally, Kasim and the others who used to live in the cultivation villages had been completely oblivious to the above circumstances despite having been born in the Sauron Duchy. They had been people living in small villages, and although they knew that there was a Scylla territory within the duchy, they didn't know the details of the history between the Sauron Duchy and the Scylla race. Things might have been different if they had done research in history books that could be found in the libraries of cities, but the only time that Kasim and his companions had visited a city was temporary, after they had already become refugees and fled to the Hartner Duchy. "Recently, people of the resistance have been coming here often, though," said ProDigal. "They ask us to fight with them and give them food and other goods." But the Scylla apparently still had discussions with the resistance as well, because they would prefer the statesmen of the Sauron family who had acknowledged their right to rule themselves for a long time over those of the Amid Empire. "It's fine for us to secretly give them food and goods, let them move about in our territory and let them build hideouts here, but the other chiefs and I do not want to participate in the war," said ProDigal. "It isn't as if we have no obligation at all, and these are the requests of fellow worshippers of Vida, but there seems to be little for us to gain even if we did risk the members of our tribes and win." "Well, There are some chiefs who are saying that they can't trust the empire because of the incident that Vandalikan is investigating for us right now, so I'm at a loss as to what to do as well. Mother? Is it alright to say so much? Prival asked. This is the first I've heard of this. Porvina-chan and I are present as well. Is this not information that you should not be revealing to outsiders? Princess Livia agreed. The two of them had been listening with keen interest, but now that she was revealing so much important information, they couldn't help but point this out. But then, with a completely cool expression, Perivale said something outrageous. Isn't it alright? Vandalikan is going to become Prival's husband, so we'll all be family once that happens. Why are things coming to that? Prival demanded. His Majesty is Prival-san's husband? Princess Livia exclaimed in shock. I mean, you did the courting ritual, didn't you? Said Perivale. That's true, but he's still a child. Said Prival. Have you forgotten the Shrine Maiden's vow? You swore to Marivale that the courting ritual would be fulfilled, didn't you? Ah, that's right. It seemed that for religious reasons, Prival had to take the partner chosen by the courting ritual as her husband. Van won't live here, said Porvina. He can visit from time to time, though. Also, there are a lot of people who love Van, you know. There won't be any problems if he can visit from time to time, said Perivale. Unlike humans and beast people, marriage between us stop about 10 years after children are born. Also, we don't have limits on the number of wives and husbands one can have, so there are no problems there, either. Sila were a race made up entirely of women, so their husbands were always members of different races. This meant that their lifespans differed as well. Thus, the Sila race cut off their marriages once their children were born and they grew up to a certain extent. And it wasn't as if the number of husband candidates was always equal to the Sila population, so there were no limits to the number of wives and husbands one could have. That was left for individuals to decide. But generally, the husbands never outnumbered the wives, so it was essentially a system where a single husband could have many wives. And though they did cut their marriages short, couples did have feelings for each other, so as a result, many couples remained married until one of them died. There had also been cases where a traveler would wander into the territory, have relations with a Sila for a few days and then leave again. Perivale finished explaining the Sila race's view on marriage. That's how it is, so can't we make something work? Porvina and Livia both had their hands together in a prayer-like pose as they responded. That's fine, said Porvina. There is no problem with that, said Princess Livia. The two of them agreed to it easily, and now Perivale was the one who was surprised. Eh? Is that all right? Seriously? You know, it's not like I have to take that boy as my husband no matter what, said Prival. If it won't work out, I can just pray to Marivale for a few days, probably over a month, and have her forgive me. Is it really all right to agree so easily? Asked Orbia. That child seems like he would be as popular as my important person. He seems like he has a strange aura about him. Porvina and Princess Livia once again assured the three of them that there were no problems. At this point in time, Vandali essentially already had multiple wives, and not much would change from Prival being added to the list. Like the ghouls, the Sila had quite loose views on marriage, so it was unlikely that there would be any disagreements. It was possible that Eleonora and Belmond would have their own opinions on this, but they would probably not put up any real objections. The undead Ritu and Saria were unlikely to object as well. They were always able to see the countless spirits that were constantly nestling close to Vandali, anyway. And Perivale-san, the chief of the village, will become a blood relative, which should be a positive thing for His Majesty. Princess Livia had made this self-interested calculation as well. Though she was ignorant when it came to politics, she did think of things like this from time to time. Then there aren't any problems, are there? Said Perivale. First of all, we should confirm things with the person in question. Said Prival. What's the matter? Are you not satisfied with that boy, Prival? Orbia asked. I'm sure that he'll become just as good a man as that person in the future. Orbia-san, that's not reassuring at all unless you tell me more about that person, Prival pointed out. Well, in a few more years, Prival and the other living Sila were under the effect of demon path enticement, though not as much as Orbia, who was a spirit. Thus, Prival wasn't as dissatisfied as she seemed. She had been planning to take someone as a husband either way. But His Majesty is a damp. Is that all right? Princess Livia asked. You are in the middle of negotiating with the Amid Empire, aren't you? and it is possible that he will still appear younger than Privel-san even a few years from now. In the Empire, whose army the Scylla was currently negotiating with, dampers were treated as a type of undead beings that needed to be exterminated. A damper, huh? If it was found out, the Amid Empire would probably make some noise about it, but it will be fine as long as they don't find out, so I suppose we just need to keep it a secret, said ProDigal. And this will be several years from now, not right now. Apparently, the Scylla didn't really mind. And as for his lifespan, it's actually better that he lives several times longer than a human, ProDigal added. Us Scylla live for 400 years, after all. Oh no, His Majesty is half dark elf, said Princess Livia. Ah, no problem, a dark elf? ProDigal and the others were startled by this revelation. One of Vankun's parents is a dark elf? Privel exclaimed. I thought that he was a damp with a parent who was a human with some beast person or titan blood, since his body is so small and he has no beast ears or tail. I didn't think that one of his parents was a dark elf, said Orbia. It's my first time seeing a damper like that. It seemed that none of them had expected that Vandali was a damper born to a dark elf. Considering that his skin was white to the point that he looked ill, it would have been unreasonable to expect them to have realized this. However, dampers born to a human parent had lifespans between 300 and 500 years, similar to Scylla. However, dampers born to dark elves, who had lifespans of 1,000 years, lived between 3,000 to 5,000 years. The difference was overwhelming. A dark elf, huh? Well, that's fine, isn't it? Said Privel. You're right, said ProDigal. In the end, it seemed that nobody cared too much. He's a boy who agreed to find Orbia's killer in exchange for some seeds, ducks and huge capybaras. If we hated a boy like that for such small reasons, Vida and Marivale would punish us, said ProDigal. Please take care of Privel and Orbia. Yeah, leave it to us, said Porvina. Wait a moment, said Orbia. Chief, Porvina-chan, I'm going back to the circle of reincarnation once I make sure that person is safe. Orbia-san, haven't you been tamed by that boy, just like Livia-san? So let's stay together, said Privel. Normally, I would recommend returning to the circle of transmigration as well, but I'm sure it's fine if you become an undead like Livia-san, said Porvina. Stay. Don't say it like it's such a small deal. I'm telling you, I have a person I've chosen in my heart, said Orbia. Orbia-san, it isn't as if those who are tamed by His Majesty must become his lovers, Princess Livia pointed out. As this girl's talk began to get more exciting, a voice came from outside. Chief, can I have a word? I have guests, so say what you need to say from there, said ProDigal, who had returned to her chief-like demeanor in an instant. The person outside hesitated for a few moments before speaking again. Apparently, there will be a guest coming tomorrow. A visitor? Porvina repeated. If it is someone from the Empire's army, we can leave. No, when they just say, guests, they're talking about the resistance, said ProDigal. Vandali returned soon after this, carrying the two collapsed Scylla guards with telekinesis. Monster explanation. Scylla, a race of beautiful women with the lower halves of octopuses, born between Vida, the goddess of life and love, and a monster. The details of this monster have been lost from the records. The other distinct outer characteristic that they have is that many Scylla possess green hair and eyes. As their appearances suggest, they are a race of people suited to living in water, and they like living at watersides, ponds, lakes, marshes and riversides, though not as much as mer people. But this is merely a preference. They are more resistant to dry conditions than they appear. Due to the way they live, they fight lizardmen for territory more often than they fight humans. Their base rank is 3, and groups that live together in villages almost always have a chief who is rank 5 or above. Their main weapons are the tentacles of the lower halves of their bodies, and many have acquired the unarmed fighting technique and whip technique skills. Also, they possess the superhuman strength skill from birth, so the thin arms of their upper bodies have much more physical strength than their appearance would suggest. The tips of their tentacles and the fingertips of their upper bodies are capable of releasing ink like octopuses, allowing them to blind their enemies. Also, perhaps due to their origins, many of them learn to use life, water and earth attribute magic. When fighting Scylla, the battlefield is often close to water, so they are often formidable enemies that are stronger than their ranks suggest. In the ancient past, they were feared as monsters who would pretend to be drowning and then attack men who would dive into the water to save them, but it is now known among researchers that this is the Scylla courting ritual and they are simply singing and dancing to attract men who would become their husbands. Their main habitat is their territory on the southern tip of the Sauron Duchy, that is currently under occupation by the Amid Empire, in the Barngaya continent, but there are some small villages scattered around the land. Incidentally, according to written copies of the records from the Age of the Gods, the founder of the Scylla and her daughters had the heads of wolves, dragons, serpents and other creatures on the ends of their tentacles. But the great majority of researchers now agree that this depiction was falsely created by the Church of Alda to create an evil image of Scylla, who are a race created by Veda. The distinctly shaped tailbones of Scylla are used as proof of having exterminated them. Their livers and the bones of their upper bodies can be used in alchemy, while the tentacles of their lower bodies can be used as food. Also, the ink in their ink sacs can be used to create inks and dyes. However, the fact that the majority of Scylla are cheerful and possess the ability to reason and interact with people is already well known, so requests to exterminate them are not sent out except in places like the Amid Empire, where the factions of the Church of Aldu other than the peaceful faction are greatly influential. Chapter 109, The Approaching Evil. Resistance messengers would come to this village tomorrow. I want to talk to those people as well. Is that all right? Asked Vandali upon hearing this news, wanting to be present at the meeting. Though he wasn't very perceptive, even he had managed to conclude that Orbia's lover, a person who had come into the Scylla territory from the outside, was likely one of the negotiators for the Empire's army or a member of the resistance. Even if Orbia's lover was not among the messengers who would come here tomorrow, there was a chance that the resistance would have some information regarding the Scylla serial killing. And the one who was coming to negotiate, the leader of the reborn Sauron army, was apparently a believer of Veda, so it seemed likely that he would listen to what Vandali had to say. We don't mind, but the other party might not like it, so I can't give you a definite promise, said ProDigal. I don't think there will be a problem, though. Seeing that Orbia seemed restless after hearing ProDigal's reply, Vandali's heart grew even heavier now that it seemed even more likely that her lover was a member of the resistance. Well then, you should stay the night here, said Privel. It's already the middle of the night, so I was planning to suggest that from the beginning, though. That's right, said ProDigal. Ah, but as per the custom, Privel will be sleeping in a different hut. Shrine maidens must keep their bodies pure until the festival, you see. There aren't any customs that force the husband Van to sleep alone, so he'll be fine, said Porvina. Porvina, what do you mean by husband? Vandali asked. Well, he is His Majesty, isn't he? He'll need 2 more, said ProDigal. ProDigal-san, are you being a little too serious about the fact that His Majesty is His Majesty? Asked Princess Livia. It is troublesome if you take it seriously, said Vandali. It wasn't as if they had revealed the entire truth yet. Vandali and Porvina were led to a hut used by visiting merchants. It was a little small for Porvina, but the Scylla had apparently thought it best to give them a vacant hut that nobody was using right now. Mother said that you wouldn't be able to rest properly if there were other people around, said Privel. Livia-san would cause a big fuss just by being seen, after all. As a result of this considerate treatment, Vandali and his companions had gained time to discuss things freely. Porvina grunted. Since it was a time of night where good children were asleep, Porvina was sleeping soundly, clutching Vandali firmly against her large body. Vandali escaped with out-of-body experience and asked Hannah, one of the ghosts that were accompanying him, to deliver a message to everyone waiting back at the camp. Yes. Leave it to me, she said in a lively tone before vanishing silently. She had become a blaze ghost recently, as her race title suggested. She would light up the dark night like a lamp, but as she was a ghost, she was able to conceal her presence as she moved. She wasn't releasing killing intent into her surroundings or anything like that, so it would be impossible for anyone who wasn't a spiritualist to find her. I'll ask the ghosts to deliver messages rather than undead insects from now on. Ghosts wouldn't be spotted, nor would they accidentally get caught in spider webs. Incidentally, the contents of the message were a report of the current plans and a request to get information out of the resistance members that were being protected at the camp. So, I have something to talk to you about, Vandali said. What? A message for me? Orbia turned around as Vandali spoke to her. She had been silent but looking restless up until now. Vandali had already undone the visualization spell on her, so her voice wouldn't reach Porvina. Before you received the ring from your lover, did you have any injury on your finger? Vandali asked. Like being pricked by a thorn, for instance. Having realized the meaning of this question, Princess Livia gasped. Your Majesty, that is, no, I don't think I had any injuries on my fingers. When he put the ring on me, I kind of felt something pricking me. I suppose I wasn't just imagining it. Was there something left on the finger of my body? Orbia answered without hesitation, despite Princess Livia's attempt to interrupt Vandali's questioning. Princess Livia blinked in surprise. Orbia looked at her, sighed and dropped her shoulders as she continued. I'm not very smart, but maybe because of Van Kun's mana, my head feels refreshed and I can think more clearly than I did back when I was alive. I don't need anyone to tell me to know that person is suspicious. His body was nowhere to be found, the ring is gone and we haven't heard anything from him despite the fact that his lover died days ago. No matter how you look at it, it's suspicious, isn't it? Orbia gave a self-deprecating smile. But it's not like it's certain that I was killed by that person, is it? There is no definite evidence, said Vandali. Everything about the incident was suspicious, but there wasn't any proof or eyewitness testimony. There was no denying that Orbia's lover was a suspect, but there was also no denying that there wasn't any evidence supporting these suspicions. Then I want to believe in that person. He's someone that I really came to love, that's why I still don't want to tell you who he is. I'm sorry, Orbia said, casting her eyes down apologetically. Vandali nodded in understanding. It doesn't bother me, he said. So, about tomorrow, wait, you're alright with this? You're alright with me staying quiet? Aren't I being quite selfish about this? Were you just pretending? Would it have been better if I'd read the mood and made you talk? What do you mean, read the mood? Orbia seemed agitated, but Vandali simply looked at her blankly and blinked a few times. Orbia-san, spirits are fundamentally self-indulgent and self-centered, prioritizing their own emotions while disregarding reason. That's how they are, said Vandali. Rational spirits like Princess Livia and the others are very rare. Spirits were the dead who lingered in this world rather than returning to the circle of transmigration after leaving their bodies. There was no way that such beings could be rational. Many of them let their emotions get out of control, their thoughts were devoid of logic in certain places and many of them unconsciously altered their own memories of the past. And since their frontal lobes and hippocampi were missing, they were unable to restrain themselves and their ability to store and retain memories couldn't be relied on. They didn't even possess lungs to take deep breaths and calm down. They didn't lose consciousness when they got too worked up, nor would they get tired from being angry, as they didn't possess stamina that would run out. There was no end to how mad spirits released from their physical bodies by death could become. In fact, weren't you in that kind of state before you met us, Orbia-san? Vandali pointed out. Orbia groaned as she remembered how she had spent days on end searching endlessly for the ring that might have fallen into the bottom of the marsh, despite the fact that she was unable to dig the mud up after having become a spirit. The only reason she could conduct herself in the same way that she had when she was alive was due to Vandali's influence and the mana that he had supplied her. But Vandali wasn't judging her negatively because she was a spirit. I'm not trying to speak ill of spirits, he said. It's not a matter of being good or bad, that's simply how spirits are. I'm trying to say that I don't think badly of you for choosing to believe in your lover, Orbia-san. But, it's fine, Vandali reassured her. I'm taking all kinds of measures. He had accepted that Orbia would remain silent about her lover, but that didn't mean that he was cutting corners when it came to investigating the incident. He had already sent his Lima familiars to the other Sila villages in the Sila territory, whose locations he had heard from Orbia herself, Privel and Perai Vale, as well as the fort that had been built on its boundary. The fragile lemurs quickly broke down if they entered water. In this water-filled region, they could only form something like a coarse draining net, but the Sila had been murdered by their lovers, after all. Unlike the Sila themselves, they wouldn't go into the waters during winter. And since it is likely that there are multiple criminals, it is likely that they will be easy to spot from above when they move, said Vandali. Eh? How do you know this, your majesty? Princess Livia asked. After they killed Orbia-san, they put her body on display, said Vandali. That would have been difficult to do alone. In this world, there were martial skills that would allow an iron sword to split a boulder in two, as well as convenient magic spells. There were also all kinds of skills that provided help with certain actions. But Vandali imagined that even if all of these things had been used freely, the things that had been done to Orbia's corpse would have been difficult to carry out alone. After Orbia had been killed, her tentacles had been severed, her chest cut into shreds, several arrows fired into her, the holy symbol of Alda branded into her body, and then she had been tied to a nearby tree with rope. This was clearly too much work for a single person. Including the branding iron, too many tools were necessary for all of this. Martial skills were too powerful to use on a corpse. If they were used to try to cut Orbia's chest into pieces, it was more likely that her chest would be cut or pierced through completely. The tentacles had all been cut at different angles, too. It was difficult to imagine that a martial skill had been used 8 times if the corpse had been placed on the ground or already hung up on the tree when this was done. Then there would have been blade marks visible on the ground or on the tree. Even if they had tried to forcibly cover up the tracks, the sealer would have noticed. Of course, this would have been difficult with magic as well. Even if the murderer was an adventurer or a knight with high attribute values and skill levels, there was a limit to what he could have done alone. That's why I think we'll be able to have a good idea of what's happening if we look out for things, said Vandali. I see, that's amazing, Your Majesty, said Princess Livia. I thought you spaced out a lot, but you do a lot more thinking than I'd imagined, said Orbia. That's pretty good. Not at all, this is second-hand knowledge, said Vandali. Princess Livia and Orbia seemed impressed, but this was second-hand knowledge that Vandali had acquired from a mystery manga and the police dramas that he had seen on Earth. Come to think of it, is that manga still being serialized on Earth? And even if you were to tell us your lover's name, what he looks like and where he belongs, it's not like I'd be able to do anything right away, Vandali added. In Japan, when a suspect's face and full name were revealed, their address and workplace would be identified soon after, and it was possible to figure out their locations through things like security camera footage. But in Lambda, even with this information, Vandali would be unable to find Orbia's lover without searching for him. After all, there were no photographs or security cameras. This was a world filled with wilderness that hadn't been touched by civilization. Lemurs could be used as security cameras, but their eyesight was only about as good as Vandali's, so they had to be relatively close in order to identify people's faces. But once the criminal's face and name were known, it would be possible to warn everyone in all of the villages to be on guard against them and to not follow them alone. Also, if the lemurs found the spirits of the other victims, it was possible to summon them here through necromancy. It was possible that they would provide information about the criminal. And if your lover is involved with the resistance, I'll probably learn something tomorrow, said Vandali. If Orbia's lover was involved in the resistance and present in the meeting, he would definitely show some kind of response if Vandali were to introduce himself as a special spiritualist who was investigating the serial killing case. Whether that response would be asking to meet Orbia one more time or trying to silence Vandali remains to be seen, however. I see. I suppose that's true. There'll be something to learn, said Orbia. Judging from the way that she was clutching her head in worry, it seemed certain that her lover was indeed involved with the resistance. It wasn't guaranteed that he would actually be among the visiting messengers, however. Your Majesty, won't things be bad for Orbia-san if it turns out that the criminal is her lover? Princess Livia whispered into Vandali's ear. She is already being supplied with your mana, so she may turn into a ghost. Even in ancient times, deep feelings of love turning into rage and hatred had never been rare. Orbia was currently a spirit, and Vandali was supplying her with plenty of mana. As Princess Livia feared, certain events could cause Orbia to turn into a monster and attack her murderer. Vandali gave an understanding nod. Indeed, we need to make sure beforehand what kind of undead she wants to become. It's impossible to become a zombie after already becoming a ghost, after all. That's RA? Princess Livia did a double take. If she wants to become a zombie, I need to use corpse healing to repair the damage and then cast preservation, but since her breasts and some of her tentacles are missing, that would mean doing some patchwork there. No, are you not going to stop her? Is there a need to? Vandali thought that revenge was generally acceptable as long as the hatred wasn't unjustified. He didn't see any need to stop Orbia, even if she were turn into a ghost and attack the criminal. As long as nobody other than the murderer and his accomplices were involved, he saw no problems with it. Now that you say that, I get the feeling that there isn't any need to stop her, said Princess Livia. Now that she thought about it, she remembered that she herself had increased in rank through her anger and hatred, even if Vandali had encouraged it. Considering that, she couldn't think of a single reason to stop Orbia if she chose to take revenge. What are you guys talking about? Orbia asked. Orbia-san, His Majesty was just saying that he'd like you to choose between being a zombie or a ghost, said Princess Livia. I'm telling you, I won't become an undead. Well, I am thankful to you, so if you insist, what are the differences between a ghost and a zombie? Well, if you become a ghost, Princess Livia's undead transformation counseling continued until late into the night. When Haj came to, he realized that he was lying in a room with its inner surface covered in white, bone-like tiles. The truth was that not only the room's inner surfaces, but the entire room, was made of bone. Where am I? Thinking that he had been captured and thrown in jail, Mage sprang to his feet and looked around. But all he saw was around a third of his companions that he had been fleeing with, all men, lying in beds as well. There weren't any collars, handcuffs or shackles around their ankles. There was nothing else in the room but the beds that they were lying on and a candlestick burning with an eerie-looking blue flame. It didn't even appear as if there were any doors or windows. What happened to us? What is this place? Where are those monsters and skeletons? As Mage stood there, so bewildered that he had forgotten to wake his companions up, the wall transformed into a door before his very eyes. Ah, so you have regained consciousness. 3 women entered. The one at the front was a blonde woman wearing a tailcoat who appeared to be about 20 years old. Her straight posture and the way she carried herself was that of an exceptional servant that a nobleman or rich person might employ, but her figure was so voluptuous that Mage had to swallow the saliva that he had gathered in his mouth. Her swelling chest was so curvaceous that it looked as if her tailcoat would rip, and her hips were so abundant that one's fingers would be buried if they tried grasping them. Her beautiful face, which still appeared bruised, only added to a degenerate kind of charm rather than appearing flawed. It would be reasonable to believe that she was a high-class prostitute, specialized for serving royals and nobles, who had been ordered to dress as a steward. However, the ears that were covered in her soft hair were those of a monkey's, and a silver tail longer than her arm was swaying over her bottom. Was she a beast person with parents of different races? I have prepared meals for you. Will you eat? The others are resting in other rooms, so please rest assured. Their injuries have been treated as well. Behind the female steward was a pair of beautiful women who looked very similar to each other, a little past their mid-teenage years. They looked adorable, but the abundant curves of their aprons and the white thighs visible at the hems of their dresses gave off a different kind of charm from the steward, but for some reason, they were wearing sinister-looking shoulder pads and bracers. Having noticed this, Mage's face stiffened, but the fragrant smell coming from the pot that they were carrying hit him right in the stomach. He hadn't eaten anything since morning, and he had lost consciousness right after fleeing desperately for his life, so all of his stamina had been exhausted. We made soup that is easy to eat. There is also more available for second helpings, said one of the maids. Ah, thanks, said Mage. With their hunger stimulated by the soup that was being served in wooden bowls, his companions began waking up as well. Seeing them, Mage returned to his senses. But let me ask you, he said. Who in the world are you people? Where is this, and what happened after we lost consciousness? And what was that monster? Highly trained, disciplined members of the resistance would never accept food from strangers without any sense of caution. But Mage and his companions were fake members of the resistance. They were just a group of hoodlums and thugs from the city. It was a miracle that they hadn't become separated when they fled. It was likely that they would fill their stomachs with the delicious-smelling food being offered to them as soon as they woke up without asking any questions. But with the food being offered by 3 slightly strange but beautiful women, they would be completely enticed. Mage wanted to find out what kind of situation that they were in before that happened. If there was poison in the soup, not the life-threatening kind, but some kind of drug, they would be in trouble. With the extermination force ambushing them today, Mage had finally realized that although he and his companions just considered themselves to be worthless swindlers who called themselves the Resistance, the Empire considered them to be rebellious. You people are the brave men and women of the Resistance, fighting against the invaders of the Amid Empire. There is no mistake here, is there? The female butler asked, narrowing her eyes. Pinned down by her gaze, Mage felt a chill run down his spine as he answered reflexively. That's right. We're the Reborn Sorondachi Liberation Front Army. He gave an organization name that was a random combination of 2 famous resistance organizations. And he continued speaking. He went on and on, using a believable tone of speech that he had trained from when he had pretended to be a part of the resistance and swindled naive villagers. During the day, we encountered a cowardly ambush set by the extermination force organized by the Amid Empire, and we were in the middle of retreating in order to meet up with our allies who are on standby at our hideout. We thank you from the bottoms of our hearts for sheltering us and treating our injuries. Hearing this, his now awake companions reflexively stiffened their expressions. I don't know how to thank you after you saved us from such danger. Thanks to you, we have another chance to fight the enemy. Thank you. Their voices were stiff because of their fear of the sharp glint in the female steward's eyes, but it was probably best they began acting right away. As fake members of the resistance. The female steward gave a sweet smile. I see, then please rest assured. Our master is someone who feels sorrow over the current state of the Sauron Duchy and wishes for its liberation from the Amid Empire and believers of Eldar who began this unjust war. He supports you all." Haj and his companions felt truly relieved to hear this. But Haj's sense of wariness quickly came back. "Wait," he said. "Supports you all." Haj and his companions felt truly relieved to hear this. But Haj's sense of wariness quickly came back. "Wait," he said. "I'm sorry if it feels like we're doubting the ones who saved us, but I want you to tell me who your master is." He thought it possible that the female steward was telling lies to try and trick him and his companions, but the answer he got made him think that a lie would have been 100 times better. "Please rest assured. We are these kinds of people," said the female butler, exposing her crimson eyes and fangs. Haj and his companions screamed. "Hajaniki! Why did you tell such lies to a vampire? If they find out, we're going to be killed. Those maids have unnaturally white skin as well, I'm sure they're vampires as well. You morons. Then would you have preferred if I told the truth? There's no way I could do that, is there?" Haj and his companions were having a conversation, or rather, an argument, that echoed through the bone pipes that had been placed in the room. "I suppose I was hasty to reveal the fact that I am a vampire after all," Belmont said with a sigh. She hadn't expected them to be that frightened of her. "Well, it cannot be helped," said Sam. They did not even know what to name themselves in order to conceal their true identities. "Jayu. And since you had no way of proving our position, I do believe there was no other option but to reveal that you are a vampire," said Bone Man. The two of them were consoling Belmont while hanging up laundry on laundry hangers made of bones. They had been washing the underwear and trousers of the fake resistance members who had soiled themselves while Belmont was talking to them. "They didn't have to be so scared of us," said Saria. "They were struggling so much that their sheets came off, and, let's forget about that, Nay-san. We have no choice but to erase that from our memories," said Rita. The two of them grimaced, having seen all kinds of unsightly things. "It doesn't seem like we'll be able to ask them anything until they calm down." "What will we do?" asked Hannah, who had brought Vandali's message here. She was wearing a troubled expression as her flames flickered. Belmont thought for a moment. They couldn't torture Haj and his companions. "Please tell Danasama that we will listen to what they have to say if they calm down," she said finally. "Understood," said Hannah as she disappeared, no doubt heading back to where Vandali was. But what could those people be hiding? Rita wondered. They were saying something about lies. Jayu. Could it be that they are imposters who are calling themselves members of the resistance? Jayu. Bone Man arrived at the truth through intuition while drying the captive's underwear. However, seeing the many sad-looking faces around him, he quickly shut his mouth. Resistance, wrong? File-ed? No good? These were the dispirited faces of Rapisage and Yamata. Had they gone and made a mistake? Should they not have brought these people here? Had they failed their task? Their faces seemed to be asking these questions. Jayu. No, they were being chased by the extermination force, so there is no doubt that they are resistance members, said Belmont, extending a helping hand to the dismayed Bone Man. But Belmont hadn't declared this just to comfort Rapisage and Yamata. She had declared it because she truly thought that this was the case. The lies they are talking about are probably things such as the name of their organization and the fact that there are still allies in their base. Belmont continued. What do you mean? Ritu asked. I mean that they wanted to make themselves appear more powerful, so they pretended to be part of a larger organization than they actually are. I see. The truth was that Belmont was just as bad as Vandali at seeing people's true thoughts, if not worse. She had lived for over 10,000 years. But more than 90% of that time had been spent maintaining and managing the mansion by the underground lake in the hideout of her former master Turnisha, so there had been no way for her to develop her ability to communicate with others. Rather than her insight to read deeper into people becoming more polished, it had become weathered and turned into dust. Eleonora, who had received training as a spy, would have likely been able to see through the lies of Haj and his companions and discern their true strength, but Belmont was unable to judge their abilities accurately. It's true that they looked weak, said Rita. Their weapons were crude, too. Well, I suppose that is how it is. They are just humans, after all, said Belmont. She had intended to defend Haj and his companions from Rita's words, but the truth was that she didn't think much at all of the human race as a whole. Belmont was a rank 10 monster who was capable of destroying an entire small nation on her own. thinking that Hage and his companions were reasonably competent was simply within her margin of measurement error. There were likely beings just as powerful who would still be able to more accurately determine the strength of Hage and his companions, but having spent about 10,000 years as a hikikomori, Belmont didn't possess that insight. "We should have asked Eleonora-san to come," said Saria. "With her charming demon eyes, we would have been able to hear what they have to say." "We can't leave too few people in Taylorsheim," said Darsa. "It can't be helped, so let's just wait until the resistance people calm down, all right?" "But Darsa-sama, the lies that they have told are quite meaningless," said Sam. "Even if they are part of a smaller organization, it would not bother Botchin in the slightest." "Eh? Wouldn't it have been better if we'd saved people who were part of a bigger resistance organization?" asked Rita. "Rita-san, as long as we have actually managed to help the resistance, that's enough," said Darsa. "Even if the organization that Hage-san and his friends belong to is small, he might be able to introduce us to other resistance organizations. You have realized this." "How amazing of you, Darsa-sama!" Sam exclaimed. As Darsa and Sam said, Vandali would likely choose to help any organization resistance, no matter how big or small it was. This would lead to a build-up of trust among the other resistance organizations. And it was too lucky, too convenient to think that they had made contact with a prominent resistance organization without doing any proper information gathering beforehand. Though they had likely never imagined that they would catch fake resistance members. "Come to think of it, what will we do with the people in the other two rooms?" Belmont asked. The women had been placed in another room, with the remaining men in a third, larger room. They were already awake and eating their meals. These rooms also contained bone pipes that acted as speaking tubes, picking up the conversations inside to some extent. For some reason, the people in the women's room seem to be afraid that they are going to be killed and have their blood consumed by Belmont Dono's master, in other words, Botchin, said Sam. It seemed that things in the women's room wasn't much different from the people in Hage's room. And as for the ones in the last room where the rest of the fake resistance were gathered, there were no wary men like Hage. They had ogled Belmont and the twins and ate the soup without hesitation, even asking for seconds. They were big fish in a way, but they're talking about me, Nay-san and Belmont-san. They're saying who they would prefer as a partner for a night, comparing us to other resistance members and women they know, and talking about our chests and bottoms. Rita said indignantly. They were simply low people. They were lacking caution to the point that Belmont hadn't needed to reveal that she was a vampire. Incidentally, you are the most popular, Belmont-san, Rita added. You did it. That does not make me happy in the slightest, said Belmont. But we were popular too, it was only a narrow margin, so we have not lost, said Saria. Oh, if I had Botchin's permission, I would like to invite these people to a walk through the night sky, said Sam. Father, I know you're holding yourself back, but do it better, said Rita. Sam-san, your fear aura is coming out. Please calm down, said Darsa. By the way, those people, I wonder when those people are going to realize that the floors, walls and the beds that they slept in are made of Notchen made of bones, said Saria. Notchen let out a groan. The face of Marduk, the man who commanded the extermination force, stiffened as he listened to the report of the spy who had returned safely. A peculiar undead made by combining the corpses of women with a hydra, and a female Mage who manipulates lightning. How unexpected. The resistance contained many believers of that filthy goddess. Marduk had considered that there could be evil individuals who made use of undead, but to think that they would really exist. But it did not appear that they were allies of the resistance, the spy continued. They were trying to run away from the undead. Which means that this undead and female Mage are a different lot from the resistance, said Marduk. There was a village of Mage who worshipped Vida, and the undead that they used as a watchdog had captured the resistance members. That was the outline of the situation that Marduk had drawn inside his head. What will we do? The spy asked. Giving chase would be simple, but we are already inside the Scylla territory. The enemy does not seem to be a part of the resistance. Should we withdraw for now? Marduk rubbed his thick jaw as he contemplated his aide's words. No, we will continue scouting through force, he said. We will withdraw after acquiring some information regarding this undead and female Mage. But won't this cause problems with the negotiations with the Scylla? We are continuing because it will cause problems. Marduk disapproved of the decision made by the upper-ranking members of the extermination army, and Emperor Marzukzul himself, to conduct negotiations with the filthy race that had been created by Vida. As the descendant of the great champion Belwood, it was the duty of the emperor to exterminate such vile creatures. To ignore this duty and conduct negotiations was utter madness. we will find evidence that the Scylla have been concealing the fact that there were Mage hiding in their territory and that these Mage are followers of an evil god who make use of undead. And then we will bring it to our superiors. Marduk declared. The Scylla race's territory was a place where the Scylla were permitted to live with their husbands and families. Members of other races created by Veda with monster heritage were not permitted to live there. It was possible that the Scylla actually knew nothing of the female Mage and the undead. They might not have noticed the presence of such beings. However, Marduk intended to report that the Scylla knowingly concealed their presence, regardless of the truth. Even if it could just cause a breakdown of negotiations, that would be enough. But our enemies are undead and Mage. They are able to see in the dark. Make camp for the night and then begin your pursuit in the morning, Marduk ordered. As you will. Everyone, prepare to make camp. The extermination force who followed the trail left by Yamata, an evil that was incredibly feeble before Nochen's wolves, approached very close. Chapter 110, Eclipse King and Tentacle King. Vandali suddenly realized that he was in a place that he didn't recognize. This is a dream. Having experienced something similar on the night that he had undergone a job change to Demon Guider, Vandali realized that he was dreaming. But he felt more unpleasant than he had in the previous dream. A sense of discomfort, as if he had accidentally trespassed into someone's house without realizing it. But it's a dream, after all. I wonder if someone else is going to come? He began looking to see if there was anything around in his field of vision, which somehow allowed him to see all of his surroundings without moving his neck. And then, suddenly, a voice called out to him. Lo, Vandali lowered his field of vision to see the owner of the voice, who was below him and to the side. There was a single Scylla there. No, looking more closely, it was something grotesque that resembled a Scylla. Green hair and 2 arms. The upper body of a woman, a lower body that resembled that of an octopus. All of these were just like a Scylla's at a glance. But when Vandali focused his eyes, he could see that all of these features were made of tentacles of different thicknesses, entwined around each other in bundles to form the shape of a Scylla. It was like an elaborate straw doll, made out of fibers of flesh. It didn't look particularly impressive as it was around half of Vandali's size, but it was a little ghastly to look at up close. The first thing that Vandali did was apologize to this ominous-looking creature. I'm sorry about this, he said. I'm still at an age where I'm not growing much taller, so I was searching above me without thinking. Other than the children like Chidal and Vabi, Vandali was always surrounded by people who were taller than him. That was why he had the habit of looking up while looking around to see whether anyone was around. Not at all. Do not concern yourself over such things, for it is I who summoned you here of my own accord. Please forgive me. The Scylla-like creature spoke in a neutral, flowing tone that was unimaginable given its grotesque appearance. As for how it was speaking despite not having a mouth, the tentacles that formed the mouth-like area quivered in rhythm with the words spoken by its voice. It seemed that it was rubbing the tentacles together there in order to produce sound. For a dream, the setting was quite detailed. My apologies, but could I ask who you are? And what important matter have I been summoned for? Vandali asked. Judging from the appearance of the creature, he could guess that it had some relation to the Scylla, but he still didn't know what it was, so he maintained a polite tone. The Scylla-like creature's tentacles quivered as it answered. I am known as Vale. I felt an aberrant abnormal presence among those who worship me. Wanting to ask who you might be, I summoned you here. Vale was a name that Vandali remembered hearing before. Is that not the name of the heroic goddess worshipped by the Scylla race in their territory? Heroic gods were heroes who had become gods. Thus, they underwent transformations depending on later alterations to the religion or changes in history, but it was said that many of the statues and paintings depicting them resembled the appearance that they had when they were mortals. But then, wasn't it likely that they would at least not look like masses of tentacles bound into the shape of a Scylla? That is a masquerade that I have kept up since before the founding of the Sauron kingdom that preceded the Sauron Duchy, Vale said. I was originally the evil god of slime and tentacles of the Demon King's army. I once made a vow with the goddess Veda and became a parent to the Scylla. The truth was that she had been an evil god of the Demon King's army who ruled over tentacles. After being defeated 100,000 years ago in the battle between Veda and Alda, Vale and the Scylla of that time failed to escape beyond the boundary mountain range. The Scylla separated into individual families and went their separate ways, but a sizable number of them succeeded in settling into these lands that were filled with mountains and marshes. Vale had originally been an evil god in a higher position than Fidig, the dragon god of 5 sins, so she had received less damage. And since she had believers in the Scylla race, her power recovered more quickly and she helped the Scylla survive, bestowing her divine blessing upon them and occasionally dispatching her familiar spirit. But the number of people obeying elders will grow over time, and as they began to form nations, Merivale's very existence became a heavy burden upon the Scylla. As the Scylla worshipped an evil god, not only the believers of Elder, but the believers of other gods whose knowledge and history had been forgotten, and even believers of Veda treated the Scylla as targets to be feared and persecuted. The people cannot distinguish between the evil gods who are remnants of the Demon King's army and the evil gods who are on Veda's side, said Merivale. Alder never intended to tell us apart to begin with, and Veda and the other prominent gods were still slumbering. But I do think that at least Veda's followers could understand, said Vandali. There were some who did, but there can be large differences between believers of Veda. Not all of them are descendants of those who fought in the battle that occurred 100,000 years ago. This was true then and it is still true now. I suppose that is true. Not all of Veda's followers knew the truth about the world's history. Vandali knew this, but now that he was hearing Merivale retell the tragedy of the Scylla race, he understood just how troublesome this fact was. I did consider pretending to be defeated and going into slumber temporarily, but the Scylla who was the chief at the time suggested a clever idea, Merivale continued. As Merivale was considering sacrificing herself so that the Scylla could escape persecution, the chief had suggested that they pretend that Merivale was not an evil god. As a result, Merivale, the evil god of slime and tentacles, falsely became Merivale, the heroic goddess of the Scylla, and came to be worshipped this way. That was apparently why her previous appearance of being a large mass of writhing tentacles had transformed into her current Scylla-like appearance. Incidentally, falsely altering a religion might sound easy to do from a mortal's perspective, but this was quite a dangerous act for a god like Merivale. Small alterations would be like putting small piercings in the ears, but changing from an evil god to a heroic god would need the same amount of resolve as being anesthetized and undergoing plastic surgery to the entire body while also receiving surgery to the internal organs at the same time. It was no different from asking a human to undergo a surgery to become a creature made entirely of tentacles. Even if it succeeded, their divinity would change, so their personality and biology would also change. And even this result would be considered a good one. It was also possible that they would fall apart and be extinguished with their fragments forming an entirely new god, as if they had been reincarnated. It was even possible that they would separate into two gods and become weaker. The Scylla chief of the past had suggested this without knowing how dangerous it would be, but Merivale, after long deliberation, decided that there was a chance to succeed and accepted this suggestion. And just as she had hoped, she successfully disguised herself as a heroic goddess, with only her appearance changing a little and going from being in a bygone state to being more female. She seemed happy that she had chosen to disguise herself as the heroic goddess of the Scylla, her own children. I see. So that allowed you to decrease the persecution that the Scylla suffered from outsiders, said Vandali. Yes. So, who may you be? Merivale asked. Even if you ask me who I am, is it not you who sent a divine message to Merivale-san that I would be coming? I was merely passing on the divine message that Veda-sama sent to me, and now that I am meeting you directly like this, I can tell that you are indeed not normal. Normal? Well, it isn't something that I should hide from a god, so I will tell you. When did I become so important that a god would personally come and ask who I am? Is it because of the Demon King's fragments and my mana pool that will reach 1 billion soon? Vandali wondered as he told Merivale who he was, what he had done up until now, and why he had come to the Scylla territory. Oh my, to think that these were the circumstances, Merivale murmured. For 100,000 years, Veda had been sending divine messages about Vandali to the gods who were her allies as well as her own followers, but Merivale had never received any detailed information. Merivale, who had transformed from an evil god to a heroic goddess, was partially different from the being that Veda had known. Though this was a very rough example, it was as if she had changed her address without telling anyone. I understand the situation. I, Merivale, shall become your strength. Merivale lowered her head so low that it looked as if she was crushing the lower half of her body. Please raise your head, said Vandali. I am happy to receive your support, but I am a damp. I am not someone worthy of being called on me by a god. Fidig, who had been sealed in the Scale King's nest, had met Vandali under unfortunate circumstances, but there should have been no reason for Merivale to humble herself before Vandali. Being treated like this despite that felt uncomfortable. But despite Vandali's words, Merivale showed no signs of accepting them. Unlike Rodcorti, many of Vida's allies who had once been a part of the Demon King's army were humble gods, like Fidig. Despite being a goddess, Merivale had taken a smaller form than Vandali and treated him politely. Thinking that this was the case, his impression of Merivale grew even more favorable. "More importantly, there are things that I would certainly like you to accept," said Merivale. "Because I had these, I was forced to restrict my power more than usual, but I am sure that you can make full use of them." Her body divided smoothly, revealing 2 black lumps that had been buried in the bundles of tentacles. "Are those fragments of the Demon King?" Vandali asked. "Yes," said Merivale. "These fragments are different to me in nature, so I was unable to seal both of them at once. There were originally 3, but the other was caught up in the confusion during the Battle of 10,000 years ago, and someone stole it. I would like to leave these 2 fragments with you. The Demon King's fragments could often be used as powerful weapons, but for Merivale, they were nothing but burdens. If they were misused and went out of control, it was possible that they could cause the events leading to the Demon King's resurrection. That was why she had been devoted in keeping them sealed. As a small price for doing this for me, I shall grant you the divine protection and title that I King Merivale let out a small noise of frustration. It seems that a divine protection will be impossible. Ah, Fidig said it was impossible, too. I will ask you again when you make a full recovery, said Vandali. Then a title, at least you shall become a king to all who possess tentacles, the Tentacle King. There is a similar title that is read the same way but with a different meaning, you know. You have acquired the Tentacle King title. The level of the Abyss skill has increased. Vandali was surprised that he could hear the announcer in his head even inside a dream, and also felt slightly anxious. What will I tell everyone in Taylorsheim if they start growing tentacles? But why had the Abyss skills level increased? But merely giving you a title is shall I have some of my children serve you? Asked Merivale. No, you do not have to go so far, said Vandali. But with this, what I have given you does not match the burden that I have made you bear. For Merivale, the Demon King's fragments weren't even weapons. They were equivalent to dangerous chemical pollutants. Since she was having Vandali accept them, even if he didn't consider them to be burdens, it was logical for her to provide a befitting reward. That was what she seemed to think. Then please give Orbia, Privil, Perivale-san and everyone else the divine protection that was supposed to be for me, said Vandali. Also, please tell all of the Sila that they should become my allies. I have already bestowed my divine protection upon Perivale, but as you will, said Merivale. Thank you very much. The moment Vandali finished speaking these words, his consciousness blacked out. Merivale's body collapsed like that of an octopus or squid that had used up all of its strength. He managed to return. Though I requested something of him and I am very grateful for it, I do not wish to meet him in my divine realm ever again. The truth was, Merivale had lied to Vandali. She had told Vandali that she had summoned him, but the reality was different. The moment she tried to interfere with Vandali's consciousness, he had appeared in her own divine realm. In fact, Merivale hadn't deliberately taken a form that was smaller than the embodiment of Vandali's mind. Her original body had simply been smaller than Vandali's mind. She had shuddered before the enormous, grotesque being that had suddenly appeared and was late in calling out to him. Leaving aside how grotesque and enormous his mind was, his trespassing into my divine realm was the power of the Abyss skill. I intended to look into him, but I was looked into instead. Merivale knew of several beings with powers similar to the Abyss skill that had existed in the world that she had originally been in before she became a part of the Demon King's army. These beings had been the first to be obliterated by the Demon King Euduranes. These were those who possessed the only power in that world that the Demon King could not obtain. Though Vandali possessed a power that even the Demon King did not, even with Merivale looking into him, it should have been impossible for him to step into her divine realm. This had only happened because Merivale had tried to touch Vandali's mind, only to have him follow her instead. Now that I think about it, it makes sense that he was looking up to begin with. One who is seated in the depths would need to look up in order to see those in the shallows. O gracious Vida! You bless us with constant good fortune. I pray for prosperity for me and my children. He would be able to crush even the evil schemes of the traitors, Merivale thought. With high expectations of Vandali, she gave thanks for how fortunate she had been to be able to form bonds of friendship with him. Having woken up to find himself on the verge of being suffocated due to poor Vina turning in her sleep, Vandali succeeded in using spirit form transformation on his entire body to escape from beneath her. He quickly produced threads from his mouth, made clothes and changed into them. and then he decided to inspect the Demon King's fragments that he had received from ProDigal. Judging from their names, he had decided that there would be no danger in testing them inside the room. Demon King's suckers, activate. Suction cups like those of a frog appeared on Vandaley's fingertips. When he pressed his fingertips against the wall of the hut, they attached themselves firmly to its surface. Ooh! With the suction cups sticking to the wall, he tried climbing it. The suction cups could attach and detach themselves freely, so he was able to crawl across the walls and ceilings as he wished. With this fragment of the Demon King, it would be easy to crawl across the ceilings of dungeons. And then he continued to the second fragment. Demon King's ink sacs, activate. Ink came out of Vandaley's fingertips. He made an improvised container made of earth and coated in mucus produced by his tongue, gathered the ink in there and then inspected it. He could control its properties freely, he could make it thick like squid ink or silky like octopus ink. And it seemed that he could even change its color at will. It did not have any particular smell of the sea, so it seemed that it could be used to make ink and paint. It was possible that it would even be good for dyes used to dye cloths. But one small touch is needed to make these useful in battle, Vandaley murmured. The fragments were suction cups and ink sacs, after all. Unlike the Demon King's horns and blood, they did not have properties that would allow them to become weapons immediately upon activation. Should he imitate the way that frogs, octopuses and squids used them? Using the abilities of living things in technology. This is biomimetics, I suppose. Ah, Your Majesty, you are becoming even less like a person, but I have the feeling that not much has changed, said Princess Livia. As she said, Vandaley had long been able to crawl around walls and ceilings and produce all kinds of medicines, including vitamin pills, from his tongue, claws and fangs. Perhaps suction cups and ink sacs were small additions to these. Not much has changed. You say. Orbia seemed shocked by Princess Livia's reaction. What's wrong? Porvina asked, rubbing her eyes as she sat up in her bed. Vandaley Kun is crawling around with suction cups on his fingers, and producing ink from his fingertips, said Orbia. Is that all? That's all, but then I'm going to sleep for a little longer. Porvina collapsed onto her bed and went back to sleep. After listening to her quiet breathing for a while, Orbia turned to Vandaley, half smiling. Vandaley Kun, wouldn't you rather become a sailor? She asked. No, that's impossible, since I'm a male. Incidentally, Sylar were also capable of producing ink. The level of the Demon King fusion skill has increased. The extermination force led by Marduk, who had begun moving at sunrise, reached their objective before long. They had discovered the fortress that the female Mage undead user was likely inside. These are fortress walls? There's no way fortress walls could be built in such a high mountain. Look at reality. There is actually a fortress wall built here, isn't there? Just when had these fortress walls, which were as tall as the trees of the forest, been built in this mountainous region? What about the materials? And how had nobody noticed the flat ground that supported the fortress walls? There were endless questions that could be asked, but Marduk understood the reality that enemy forces had built a fortress inside the Sylar territory. Retreat, quickly. He ordered his trembling subordinates. Marduk had thought that if the female Magian's hideout was a small one, he would be able to exterminate everyone inside, but even though the extermination force that he led was made of elite individuals, it was not a wise idea to attack the fortress and grounds protected by walls of this size. He wasn't foolish enough to have convenient delusions that only the walls were sturdy and there would be no proper soldiers defending them. He would return to the fort, report this to his superiors in the army and gather information carefully. Attacking would come after that. However, there was something that Marduk and his companions hadn't realized. They had already been discovered by the fortress walls and the trees standing around them. Notchen roared and Ison creaked as they attacked, as if refusing to let Marduk and his men get away. The immortal ints that had appeared to be normal trees up until now began moving, and the fortress wall burst into pieces, the scattered bones turning into countless skeletons. The fortress walls turned into skeletons? And there are tree monsters around us? When did this place turn into a devil's nest? They're just skeletons, no matter how many of them, Gar? Receiving direct hits from the poison breath that Notchen released along with its roars, these supposedly elite men began coughing violently, clutching their chests. And then bone animals, which were skeletons of four-legged beasts, flooded in to pin them down. The men were being treated so roughly that it seemed the undead didn't care as long as they didn't die. Retreat. Retreat. Get the captain free. The members of the unit immediately tried to help Marduk escape, but Marduk gave other orders. You moron. Don't worry about me. Everyone but the rear guard, spread out and run. At least deliver the information. This is an order. He drew his sword and joined his subordinates that were fighting as part of the rear guard. Marduk and his extermination force had already been swallowed whole by the huge flood of fast, poison-breathing skeletons. If he didn't make sacrifices and allow his subordinates to escape, they would be wiped out without managing to bring any information back to the army. Having received this order, his subordinates at the back that were still alive began running. However, they came back less than 5 seconds later. They had been sent flying back, their limbs and torsos twisting in directions they weren't supposed to. They'd already gone around us. Marduk groaned in regret as he turned around to see his subordinates convulsing on the ground. That is correct, said a voice. The owner of this voice was Belmond, who had calmly flown around behind the extermination force. Good grief, she sighed. My metal threads would sever your limbs, so I tried to capture you alive using the tail that I have been given. Perhaps because Dan-Osamu is too skilled, or perhaps because you are all too frail, this is not going very well. And it is difficult to use the petrifying demon eye on targets that are moving around restlessly. What did you say? You filthy beast person. One of the unit's members charged at Belmond in rage. Don't. Marduk shouted, but it was too late. Belmond's tail appeared to vanish, and in the next instant, Marduk's subordinate made a sound that no human body should make as he was sent flying. From the glimpse of his body that Marduk caught, he could imagine that he had been killed instantaneously from his organs rupturing and his bones crumbling to pieces. I am sincerely sorry, said Belmond. It is all due to my shortcomings that I have failed to capture everyone alive. I apologize for causing you discomfort. And then she gave Marduk a deep bow. You monster. Marduk ignored Belmond's apology, struck down a skeleton that tried to grab him and then looked around to see if there was any way of escaping the circle of undead. Be careful. There's one skeleton that's way stronger than the others. One of Marduk's subordinates shouted in warning. Be careful of the skeleton with the armor and the shield, said another. Jayu, it seems that I am hidden when I cooperate with Notchen, said Bone Man. Marduk's subordinates were doing well in keeping the skeletons back, but Bone Man was among them, cutting down Marduk's men down one after another with martial skills. Capture alive. The undead hydra that had been reported, Yamata, sang as she strangled Marduk's subordinates to death with her long necks. Holding back punch. The female Mage groaned as she crushed the men's skulls. Everyone, do you know what capturing alive and holding back mean? Sario asked. It can't be helped, Nay-san, said Rita. It's been a long time since we've fought humans. These two, who had relatively normal appearances compared to the others, used their enormous halberd and glaive to slice straight through the shields of the men using iron wall and into their bodies. Gua. My arms. Hi. My legs. My legs. Marduk's subordinates were alive, but they were on the ground screaming, having lost at least 2 limbs each. In a way, this was crueler than being killed instantly. These things, could it be that they really do intend to capture us alive? Marduk exclaimed. Things hadn't come to a conclusion yet, but even Marduk had noticed that the words capture alive had been spoken numerous times. However, he and his men felt no desire to surrender. Given the horrific scene before their eyes, they found it impossible to imagine that they would be treated decently at all. In fact, it seemed more likely that the monsters would change their minds after capturing them and just kill them anyway. Perhaps it was best to commit suicide. This thought occurred to Marduk as well, but miraculously, he found a place where the undead encirclement was thinner. Super instant response. Get out of my way. Using surpass limits and an armor technique martial skill, Marduk ran through the gaps between the skeletons and slashed at the creaking plant-type monsters in his way. Rupture. He used a swordsmanship skill, and though his mind couldn't fully endure this and his head began hurting, he ignored the pain as his sword buried itself deep into Aisen's trunk. As Aisen's red sap sprayed into the air, Marduk's lips twisted in a smile at having been able to strike back. Knowing that he had to keep running through, he tried to escape without stopping his feet. With more creaking noises, Aisen's trunk, which had been cut by Marduk's slashing attack, split as if bursting. A sap-covered arm stretched out from within the trunk and sank into Marduk's side. Gah? Marduk failed to withstand this attack and rolled across the ground with several of his ribs broken. He raised his face to see a woman crawling out from within the trunk that he had split open. A woman with green skin, branches growing from her back and, for some reason, a cow's tail. "What is this? What the hell are you things?" Marduk screamed, still lying on the ground. It seemed that he had reached the limit of what his mind could endure. The woman that had emerged from within ice and plucked one of the fruits that was growing on the branches on her back. She groaned. And then the fruit, which was harder than iron, came crashing down onto Marduk. "It has become quiet, now, hasn't it?" Sam remarked. "I suppose everyone will return soon." "Yes. Fear not, there is nothing to worry about. Even if the enemy are elite individuals, there is no chance that we will be defeated by a single unit of them. More importantly, would you like some more tea? Please. Please allow us to drink it. Like I said, there is nothing to worry about, is there?" Sam laughed. "Such worrisome people you are." While all of this was going on, Mage and his companions were sitting inside Nochen's bone mansion, listening to the sounds of battle and screams of agony coming from outside. And they were cowering before Sam, whose eyes were completely crimson, including what should have been the whites of his eyes, as he calmly offered them tea. Mage and his companions simply would not calm themselves. It would be some time before the troubled Sam realized that his efforts were in vain. Title explanation: Tentacle King, a title that is bestowed by an evil god of tentacles such as Vale, the evil god of slime and tentacles. It can also be acquired by those with tentacles who have been acknowledged as worthy of being a king, or queen, and those who are served by many races of people or monsters that possess tentacles. Historically, this title has mostly been possessed by those who possess tentacles themselves. The known exceptions are a legendary tamer who tamed a kraken, and the first king of the Sauron kingdom. It has the specific effect of providing an ability to display charismatic qualities to races of monsters and people who possess tentacles. It allows such races to become followers, requires the strengthen followers skill. It also strengthens the title holder's tentacles, and enhances skill bonuses and effects when they are used. Incidentally, the world that the Demon King Eugeranes had originally come from was a world where intelligent life forms with tentacles thrived. Because of this, there had been numerous gods of tentacles. Chapter 111, Let's look at each other's eyes and talk. "We thank you for making preparations for this meeting despite the short warning, Perivale Dono," said a man as he politely bowed his head. This man was not a messenger from the resistance, but the leader of the reborn Sauron Duchy army, Raymond Paris, who had come here with a company of messengers. He had a well-featured face that seemed natural for a man who was the illegitimate son of Duke Sauron who had fallen in battle, and most importantly, there was an air of elegance about him. On previous occasions, there had been no small number of young Sylar who had blushed upon seeing him, having been captivated. "It's no great matter, it's a time of rest for farmers as we have finished harvesting our rice, and a season where we don't do any hunting. There is still some time before the festival of Vida and Vale. Everyone is surprisingly unoccupied. However, the fact that the leader is here means that this is no trivial matter," said Perivale. She had sensed that this young human was no ordinary person. Raymond possessed a captivating charisma, the special dignity of one who stood above others that made Perivale and the other Sylar want to agree with everything he said, though it wasn't as strong as Vandale's. Raymond might be able to accomplish something. He possessed something that made others believe that. "Indeed, I don't mean to frighten you, but let us quickly get to the matter at hand." "But before that, just who are they?" Raymond asked with a confused expression. He was looking at Porvina, who was sitting next to Privel, and Vandali, who was sitting in front of Porvina. The people present here were the most prominent Sylar in the village, including Perivale, their husbands, Raymond and 2 other members of the reborn Sauron Duchy army. And then there was Privel, Porvina and Vandali. Naturally, the 3 of them were out of place, or rather, Porvina stood out tremendously. Despite that, the Sylar were focused not on Porvina, but on Vandali, who, in Raymond's eyes, appeared to be an exquisite doll of undeterminable gender. Raymond felt a curious atmosphere about them and a strange sense of discomfort, but Perivale gestured to them with her hand as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "Come to think of it, this is the first time you've met," said Perivale. "This child is Privel. She's my youngest daughter. My name is Privel. Nice to meet you." "The pleasure is mine," Raymond said as his gaze shifted upwards from Vandali to Privel. "And what about the one next to her?" "This," he faltered as he wondered how he should refer to the enormous Porvina. Considering her size, even if she was a titan, she should have been an adult. but considering her face and the size proportions of her head and body, she appeared to be a girl of around 10 years of age. Nice to meet you. My name is Porvina. I am Van's younger sister. My name is Vandali. I am Porvina's older brother. I see. Nice to meet you. Raymond was unsettled from how disproportionately young Porvina's voice sounded for her size, and the fact that Vandali, whom he had overlooked for the previously mentioned reasons, had spoken at all. However, even after the pleasantries had been exchanged, the mystery as to what children were doing here had not been solved. Vandalikan here is still small, but he is a spiritualist, you see, and he's helping us investigate the murder cases, said ProDigal, giving an explanation that cleared this mystery completely. That is amazing, said Raymond. These incidents are weighing on my mind as well, but having the assistance of a spiritualist is reassuring. And for you to possess a job as rare as the spiritualist job at such an age, you must be quite the genius. I am quite envious. The spiritualist job was said to require talent from birth in order to acquire, and it was very powerful for use in solving murder cases. There was nothing unnatural about someone with such a job being present here, even if he was a child. But Raymond continued to say, however, there are very, very few who have the ability to acquire the spiritualist job. I do not think that you would lie, but I cannot believe you right away. I think that is reasonable, said Vandali. He had only ever met a real spiritualist. But he did indeed imagine that there were nefarious impostors who swindled people by lying that they were spiritualists who could see spirits. And given Vandali's appearance, even with ProDigal's introduction, Raymond couldn't be blamed for not being able to believe that he was a spiritualist right away. Now then, I will show you proof that I am a spiritualist, said Vandali. Will you be showing us your guild card? Raymond asked. I do not think that there would be any branches that would issue them in this territory. No, more concrete proof than that, Vandali replied. Visualization. And then, in front of Vandali, or rather, by his side, Orbia's spirit appeared. A ghost? Leader, please step back. Raymond's subordinates leapt to their feet at the sight of Orbia's now visible spirit, but Raymond held up a hand. Calm yourselves, he said, and then he turned to Orbia. Are you a spirit of one of the victims? It's my first time speaking like this, said Orbia. Leader-san. I'm Orbia, and I was killed 11 days ago today. Nice to meet you. It is rather strange to say that, I suppose, said Raymond. To think that the spiritualist job can show spirits to others using a skill. No, is it a spell? In any case, I am surprised that such a method exists. I was surprised, too, said Orbia. So has there been anything out of the ordinary lately? Like someone from the resistance being attacked or contact being cut off from them? No, I haven't really heard any reports of that sort. Does this have something to do with the incidents? Raymond asked. Yeah, but if there hasn't been anything, then it's fine. Orbia seemed relieved, but Raymond had suddenly turned pale. He remained calm on the surface, but Orbia's question had clearly unsettled him. Orbia-san doesn't remember anything about when she died other than the fact that the present she received from her lover was missing, so she doesn't know what the criminal looks like, said Privel. That's why we've decided that Van-kun should come with us to the other villages to find the spirits of the other victims. That's why this case will be solved soon, ProDigal added. I'm sorry to have caused concern for you people who have come from outside. That is reassuring to hear. As fellow believers of Vida, I wish for this case to be solved as quickly as possible, said Raymond. Now then, our business is, as the leader of the reborn Sauron Duchy army, he began persuading ProDigal and the other Sila to refuse the peace plan offered by the Empire's army. The Amid Empire, with Alda being its national god, would definitely not leave the Sila race alone. It would certainly betray the Sila one day. The Sila should form an alliance with the resistance while they still have the chance, join up with the Orborn Kingdom and fight the Empire's army together. Raymond was capable of doing this. Raymond's argument had some persuasiveness to it. This was not only due to his charisma, but because of his confidence in knowing that he was actually in contact with people in the Orborn Kingdom who were helping him. There were a few holes in his speech, but this was likely because he had intended to blame the Empire for the Sila serial killing case. I understand what you want to say. But these are things that involve everyone in our territory. I'm sorry, but this isn't something that I can decide on my own, said ProDigal, avoiding giving an immediate reply. Of course. But I have heard that the chiefs of all of the villages will be gathering for the Winter Birth Festival. If you could discuss our proposal at that time, it would be more than enough, said Raymond before withdrawing on this matter. It was likely that he planned to visit the other villages to persuade the other chiefs in the same way before the winter birth festival came. It's similar to an election campaign, Vandali thought. Now then, excuse me. I thank you for making time for us today. Raymond left the room courteously, politely declining ProDigal's offer of a meal. The ghosts stationed outside watched Raymond and his men leave the village. Meanwhile, Vandali and the others gathered in the center of the room and began discussing things. Aren't Raymond and his men innocent after all? ProDigal. Yeah, I tried to lead him into saying that the present was a ring, but he didn't fall for it, said Prival. I suppose he really doesn't know? But Raymond-san was definitely unsettled, said Princess Livia. He was. You're quite perceptive, aren't you, Princess Livia? Vandali remarked. Van, you have to look at people's faces properly, said Porvina. He was definitely unsettled, but I'm sure that's because of me, said Orbia. I mean, I'm a spirit, so I'm sure he was scared. Yes, that must be it. That's definitely not it, everyone said in unison. You didn't have to all say it together. Orbia said indignantly. It was possible that the criminal was a member of the resistance. Vandali had already mentioned this to Prival, Orbia and the others. The Sila had known Raymond and the reborn Sauron Duchy army for over a year. Normally, they wouldn't believe that the criminal would be among them right away, but I had a dream with a divine message from ProDigal last night. It was surprising, but it seems that we should believe Vandali Kun, ProDigal had said. Me too. I got some kind of protection like you, Mother, and apparently I should stick to Van Kun in return. Me too, me too. I got a divine protection and I seem to have been told to not return to the circle of transmigration. Even spirits can receive divine protections, huh? Thank you, ProDigal, Vandali murmured. It seemed that ProDigal had made immediate efforts. Now that she didn't need to suppress the Demon King's fragments, she had been able to use some of her powers. As a result of Vandali acquiring the Tentacle King title, the other Sila could also feel an impressive presence and charisma, though they had already felt these to some extent before because of the Holy Son of Veda title and the insect user job, so they had become unable to completely deny his words. But it wasn't as if they had been brainwashed, nor had their previous memories disappeared. Seeing the way Raymond carried himself and hearing his words directly made it seem impossible to believe that he was involved in such a fiendish murder case. In fact, Raymond hadn't let anything slip with the trap that Prival had set in her words. It was typical for the criminal to accidentally let something slip in mystery works. But he knows something about the incidents, said Vandali. Have you noticed something, Your Majesty? Princess Livia said in shock. Van, are you feeling all right? Asked Porvina. You don't have to be so surprised, said Vandali. First, Raymond didn't mention a single word about the incidents during his speech. It's a significant case, so if he believed that the criminal wasn't among his men, it would have been fine to mention it, even if we have already come up with ways to solve it. Also, I felt his intent to kill me. Danger sense, death, which detected any risk of dying, was constantly active. Even while Vandali was listening to a hollow-sounding speech. Life is full of the unexpected, thought the liberating Princess Knight Iris Bearheart, the leader of the Sauron Liberation Front. Get back, you bastards. Or you will never have this body. She shouted. It was unexpected enough that someone who was merely the eldest daughter of a humble family of knights would be known by an outrageous title like Princess Knight, but she would never have expected that she would end up making a threat like this. Damn you, making such a foolish threat. Don't provoke her, you idiot. What'll you do if something really happens to her body? Please calm down, Princess Knight-san. Let's talk. At this rate, you won't be able to save any of your subordinates, either. Iris was holding a teaspoon-sized knife to her own throat. She was surrounded by over a dozen retreating, flustered people dressed entirely in black. Iris's companions were lying at their feet, covered in blood. There were two unmoving ones that had been burnt completely black, with white smoke rising from them. Yesterday, Iris and her men had prevented an illegal slave trader from exporting his illegal slaves out of the country, and sheltered the enslaved people at their base to allow them to rest. And then they had been attacked by these people who were covered in black clothing. These people had broken through the guards with force, and several of them had flown in from the sky. At first, everyone thought that these were the companions of the slave trader that had been killed yesterday, or assassins sent by a criminal organization that the merchant had been doing business with. But they had ignored the former slaves that Iris had immediately helped escape, And even after defeating Debus, the one who had personally killed the slave merchant, they showed no signs of wanting to finish him off. And although they possessed the skill to defeat Iris's companions one after another, their movements strangely became worse as they faced Iris. Debus had then seen an opportunity and slashed at one of black figures, who began screaming as he was burned by the sunlight streaming in through the wooden door that they had broken. And then Iris had intuitively realized these were vampires, and they were after her body. Let's see, at this rate, you people will be taking a few charred remains back to your master, incurring his wrath, and then he will purge the lot of you, I suppose? Do you know what effect this chastity protector has? Iris asked them. The blade that was barely large enough to even be called a dagger, the one Iris was pressing against her own neck, was a magic item known as a chastity protector. It was a magic item specially made for committing suicide, designed for women of noble social status. It activated when its owner thrust it willingly into her own neck or chest, turning them into a living torch and then into a pile of charred remains within a matter of seconds. It was a magic item that was thoroughly specialized for suicide, preventing the owner from being violated by enemies, whether the owner was alive or dead. These days, they were mostly uncommon antiques, but this was something that had been passed on in Iris's family from her great-grandmother's generation. "Don't be so full of yourself," said one of the vampires. "If anything, we could sever your head with a single blow, gather your blood in a jar and then deliver that to our master." "So your master wouldn't mind if he only received blood to add to his collection?" Iris asked. How do you know about government-sama? Though we call ourselves the Resistance, we're nothing more than a criminal organization to the current government. Thanks to that, I've had more opportunities to listen to stories told by our bad allies. Vampires were those who haunted the darkness in the absolute depths of the underworld, but it was impossible for them to continue hiding their existence perfectly. Rumors of the pure-breed vampires who worshipped the infamous Hihireushukaka, the evil god of joyful life, were particularly well known among those who kept up with matters in the underworld. What will you do, filthy vampires? Iris asked. I am completely serious. I would much rather end my own life than be turned into an undead. Even Elder, who forbids suicide, would forgive this foolish former believer of his. Realizing that Iris was serious, the lips of the vampires twisted in frustration beneath the black masks they were wearing to protect themselves from the sunlight. Gaberman, who had become mad with paranoia, had ordered his subordinates to carry out difficult tasks in order to turn as many of them into undead as possible without allowing them to escape. These difficult tasks were to capture well-known adventurers, knights, clergymen, royals and noblemen whose whereabouts were known. Gaberman, who was a user of space attribute magic, had gathered his subordinates, named their targets and forcibly dispatched them through teleportation. And then he had ordered them to be ready and waiting before a certain time at the places he had sent them, along with their captured targets. Fear of Gaberman had been instilled into these vampires. They could not choose to run. If he had simply gone on a rampage, they might have done so. But as Gaberman ordered these difficult tasks on them, he had seemed as if he had returned to a previous, relatively more mentally stable version of himself. Even if they were to run away, others would be sent after them through space attribute magic. The only way to obey was to fulfill his commands. Many of Gaberman's subordinates had convinced themselves of this. But the reality was that Gaberman had already decreased their numbers rapidly with his own hands, and they would be killed even if they managed to carry out his orders. Sending subordinate vampires and noble-born vampires in mixed groups of around a dozen individuals made it difficult for them to discuss escaping, which forced them to take the chance and hope that they would survive if they completed the tasks that they had been commanded to do. And if things went well, Gaberman's collection would grow as well. If they returned disgracefully after failing their tasks, he would turn them into undead on the spot. If they died, he wouldn't feel any sense of loss over such fools. It was an extremely reckless plan full of flaws that only a madman could come up with. These vampires who were being made to dance in that plan did indeed possess the knowledge for fighting humans. They were no strangers to kidnapping. However, they were not skillful enough to capture the leader of a well-known organization alive without causing her significant injury. And while they were fumbling and failing to hold their strength back the correct amount, Iris had seen what they were after. Suppressing the bitter feelings of having to yield to the threats of a mere human, the temporary leader of these vampires spoke. Very well, he said. We shall spare the lives of your companions. And then he began casting healing magic on Iris's allies. Oi, are you serious, Matthew? Stop complaining and give them potions and whatever to help them out. We just need to heal them to the point where they won't die. Amber, you stop the bleeding of the woman beneath your feet. Reluctantly, the vampires used the potions that they had planned to use to heal Iris's injuries after capturing her on her subordinates instead, and cast healing spells on them. "Ugh, oh you can't please run," groaned the barely conscious Debus. "I can't do that," Iris said without even looking at him. "Tell everyone to carry out what needs to be done in the event of my death." The reason Iris carried the chastity protector with her was so that she wouldn't leave behind a dead body and one of her allies could replace her as the Princess Knight after her death. She had been nothing more than a daughter of one of many families of knights when the Sauron Duchy was prospering, and even during her missions for the Resistance, she wore a mask. There were few who knew her face. Nobody would notice if the person behind the Resistance's symbol, the liberating Princess Knight, were to change. "With this, your companions will not die, for now," said the vampire leader. "The rest is up to you." "Very well," said Iris. "But first, I suppose I'll have you walk out of the base with me? And then I shall hand myself and the chastity protector into your custody." The vampire clicked his tongue. "Stop dragging things on. Do you think that we won't change our minds?" "The same goes for you," said Iris. "I can't have you finishing my companions off along the way to repay me for this, you see." "Very well," said the vampire. "But don't you change your mind. If you do, we'll be no back to slaughter all of your friends and even the ones who aren't your friends." The vampires walked out of the base, with Iris at their center. Debus desperately crawled after them, but all he found was a trail of footprints that stopped past a certain point and the fallen, broken fragments of the chastity protector. Vandali and his companions ate a light lunch and then departed from the village as they had told Raymond they would, accompanied by Privel and 2 Sylar guards, the ones that had led Vandali for his autopsy, to escort them. And around the time they were far enough from the village that screams and the sounds of battle wouldn't reach it, the men appeared. "Vandali Kun, wasn't it? Won't you come and join me for a conversation?" said Raymond. He himself wasn't armed, his men spread out to block the path ahead, hands on the handles of their swords. Behind Vandali's group, there were another 50 men blocking the path of retreat. It was likely that there were archers and mages stationed at distant positions as well. Vandali could sense signs of life indicating this. "You don't seem to be surprised," Raymond remarked. This was quite the abnormal situation, but Vandali and his companions were not unsettled. Vandali was constantly expressionless, but even Privel and the Sylar guards weren't fazed by the sudden appearance of Raymond and his men. They gave him a pained, disappointed look. "There sure are a lot of them," said Porvino as she looked round them, looking very carefree. "Yes, since they were expecting this," said Vandali. And though Vandali was easy to follow, he was impossible to ambush because of his constantly active danger sense, death, no matter how well any killing intent was concealed. Even without this, Vandali had made lemures and ghosts tail Raymond and his men, so their movements had been fully known. "I see. So, it really was a lie that she did not remember," said Raymond, assuming that this was the reason Vandali and his companions were not surprised. These words and this ambush were as good as a confession that he and his men were responsible for the Sylar serial killing case. "Still, you acted quite quickly, and with quite a bold method, didn't you?" Vandali remarked. "I was driven by necessity, you see," said Raymond. "And if we were not capable of bold actions, we would not be fighting as a resistance force." As he said, this ambush had been necessary for him and his men to carry out. He and his men were the real culprits behind the Sylar serial killing case that they had continuously blamed Aldo extremists for. It was absolutely impossible to avoid this fact being revealed. Raymond had no positive proof that Orbia had really lost her memories of when she had died. Even if she had, he couldn't be certain that she wouldn't regain them later. They had used a poison that caused instant death for the victims, but their eyes had remained wide open until the very end. There was no telling whether they had seen something or not. And he couldn't imagine that the spirits of the other victims would have conveniently lost their memories as well. The truth was that it was questionable as to whether the victims' spirits would still be there, but as there weren't any spiritualists among Raymond's men, they had no way of knowing. That was why Raymond needed to stop Vandali before he reached the other villages. "So, when you said conversation, did you mean that you were going to silence me?" Vandali asked. "Don't be so hasty," said Raymond. "You seem to be very clever, with the capability of thinking deeply for your age, which is why I want to suggest this. Won't you become our ally?" Vandali was surprised by Raymond's proposal. "Don't kid yourself!" Privel shouted. "Why would Vankun become your ally? And more importantly, tell us why you killed..." She tried to lash out at him. But the Scylla guards held her back. "Calm down, we're surrounded," one of them told her. "As I thought," Raymond whispered as he looked Privel and the guards. "Vandali-kun, what I value about you, even more than the fact that you are a spiritualist, is the way you won over the hearts of the Scylla far more than I ever managed to, in such a short period of time." The sense of discomfort that Raymond had felt in front of the Scylla was the friendly way that they had treated Vandali. Unlike the other children of Duke Sauron and his other relatives that had already fled to other duchies, the ones who possessed the right to succeed the throne, Raymond was an illegitimate child who had been forced to give up his right to succeed the throne. But he possessed not only raw ability, but a charisma that charmed people. This was precisely why he had taken leadership of the reborn Sauron Duchy army. But during the meeting with Perivale and the other Scylla earlier today, he had noticed that their attention had been focused on Vandali, despite the fact that Vandali had barely spoken. He and his men didn't know what it was, but there was something about Vandali that had captivated the Scylla. "It is not as if we did such horrible things to the Scylla because we wanted to," Raymond continued. "All of this was for the purpose of taking the Sauron Duchy back, to liberate all of the people of the Sauron Duchy. If you were to persuade them, I am sure the Scylla race would once again realize that they, too, are a part of the Sauron Duchy, and join us in battle." Raymond and his men had conducted the Scylla serial killing incidents and blamed it on Elder extremists. This was not only to prevent the Scylla from accepting the terms offered to them by the Empire's army, but to also have them join the resistance. Although they had named themselves the reborn Sauron Duchy army, their military strength was nowhere near that of an army. But if they acquired the fighting strength of the Scylla race of 5,000 individuals, it wouldn't be impossible to fight back against the Empire's army. And if he had the Orborn Kingdom's army mobilized through those helping him from within the kingdom, defeating the army occupying the Sauron Duchy wouldn't be a mere dream. "And, most importantly, you are a Damper," said Raymond. "We have no objection to you becoming our symbol. I am sure your existence will move the hearts of the peaceful faction of Elder worshippers in the Orborn Kingdom, who have recently been celebrating a group of heroes slaying a pure-breed vampire." Raymond gazed into Vandali's eyes, watching them dart around quickly as if he was hesitating. He continued pressing him for an answer. "At this rate, our homeland will become a vassal nation to the Empire that treats you Dampers as monsters. I want you to fight with us." Despite being very smart and composed for his age, he was still a child in the end. Raymond would definitely be able to persuade him. Or so he thought, but the response he received from Vandali was not a good one. "I have a question. Why are you trying to get the Scylla race involved?" Vandali asked. Poor Vina had been stifling a yawn and the Scylla had been watching him with bated breath, waiting to hear how Vandali would respond when he asked this question. That is, unfazed, Raymond tried to answer this question with the answer that he had come up with beforehand. It was easy to imagine that Vandali thought favorably of the Scylla, just as they loved him. But he had acquired the spiritualist job at such a young age. Though his eyes showed hesitation, his expression and voice gave away no emotion or discomposure, he showed more self-control than any adult. If Raymond didn't make a mistake, he would definitely be able to persuade Vandali. Believing this, he gave his response. "Because I wanted the fighting strength of the Scylla and this territory that is a natural fortress. I am an illegitimate child who once gave up his right to succeed the throne. In order for someone like me to rule the Sauron Duchy, I need to achieve victory against the enemy army through a plan that I am in charge of. That is why I asked my younger brother to do the dirty work. I don't think I did anything wrong. Orbia, was it? I truly don't believe I did anything wrong to her or the other victims. They were necessary sacrifices in order to win this war." "Did you think that we'd be fooled by?" Privel began shouting, but then suddenly stopped. "Eh?" She stared blankly at Raymond and blinked several times. "Commander. What are you saying? What's wrong with you?" "Command Raymond." Raymond's subordinates had been calm up until now, but now they were bewildered and flustered. What did I just blurt out?" From the reactions around him, Raymond realized in shock and panic that he had blurted out unthinkable words, but his mouth continued speaking out of his control. The Duke's legitimate child, who officially has the right to succeed the throne, has escaped to the kingdom. I mustn't wait for him to gain power and begin a plan to recapture the Sauron Duchy. If that happens, I cannot become Duke, no matter what us resistance members achieve. To make the Sauron Duchy a better place, I must become Duke and rule it. That's why I needed soldiers, an army with me at its center, to fight against the enemy. These were Raymond's true intentions. ignoring the fact that the Sila had been uninvolved in political or military matters since the Sauron Duchy was still the Sauron Kingdom. He had conducted a conspiracy in order to forcibly turn the Sila race, who had completely lost interest in the world outside their territory, into his army. But he'd had no intentions of saying this out loud. "Yes, please continue answering her and my questions," said Vandali. He was moving his eyes around restlessly, attacking Raymond's mind and implanting suggestions into it with the mental encroachment skill. And before Raymond and his men could give any kind of response, she appeared. "Tell me, did that person did Rick kill me?" Raymond and his men shuddered as this ice-cold question reached their ears. Chapter 100.
Well, so guys, I'm back, and once again, looks like I at least didn't manage to finish most of the background, but it's still a success in my case. I love how the blending work right now on the background. Uh, I'm not very sure with the rocks though. I may change the color a bit, but yeah, that water puddle over there. I'll probably add some more lighting also due to it being hit by the flashlight that's bouncing it up, causing the light that is reflecting on Miss Wednesday over here. Yeah, a bit of brighter light next time. Now that I realized. For the back, for the trees in the back, I think a bit more coloring will be needed. Yeah, I guess this is just a base color. As you can see, this is the additional. Real quick. Why don't I? Okay, here we go. Yeah, this is the painting over the base color, and it looks really nice. The blend on the tree, I think I may need to add a little bit more red over here, and also the ones over here. I am quite debating if I should maintain the blue color on this tree or make it purely red. Not sure. And for the tombstones at the background also, definitely add some details next time that I continue this. Alright, and once that is all done, I'm not sure if I should add more details on the leaves and some other parts of this design, but they all look really nice already. As you can see, it's divided into parts by this fence over here, so the details over this part are gonna be very prominent compared to the ones of at the back. We'll keep those at subtle coloring. And for the sky, yeah, the color of the sky, I'll definitely need to add something that will make it more more sky-like. I don't know what to say about that. Well, anyway, all right, yeah, and definitely next time they'll put the flipping water effects. Why can't I just finish it immediately? As you saw earlier, and I didn't manage to save my save point due to an instant crash down of the app, but well, I still managed to at least recover the bush over here. It does look kind of different compared to the one I made, but I guess it's much cleaner compared to the other one. Still debating if I should make it a bit darker for this tombstone. it does take away the attraction due to its color. Maybe make it a bit darker. hmm Let's see. Well, anyways, as for the story of the Dirt Mage Who Doesn't Want a Fourth Time, I'm sorry if I left it in a bit of a cliffhanger now that Olvia is about to get her revenge. So the situation in the swamps right now is getting in. It does a bit making up a lot of building up sequence. Are some people fighting, even vampires are being involved in this situation of capturing people. Some royalties working on their ways to get their hands on the Sovereign Duchy's ruling rights, and some few issues with some politics and religion again. And the most main situation here is the silence. Now that Vandally is actually now, I might say, a Patreon to them due to the uh, him being chosen by their god as their helper now, and him receiving the title of being a tentacle king or something, or the tentacle ruler, and him guiding the Salias to definitely he will definitely get them to his reincarnation system that he's been unaware he created already, but anyway. So far, the revenge story is getting interesting due to the Sila. Uh, uh, Now realizing that it was the revolutionary army who was trying to kill their people, so that they can entice them to not sign the peace treaty. So it's a typical getting betrayed kind of story, but it's really interesting due to the implications of the parties that are related to this. Hmm. And yeah, I'm quite excited what might happen next after this. But sorry, I might need to end it here due to a lack of time, and it's kind of late in my time right now. So far, the design is really good, I might say. Uh, Still a lot of improvement needs to be done, and more effects that I would like to apply. But other than that, it looks pretty awesome. Okay, guys. I think that will be the end of this stream. I will look forward to continuing this next week. I'll make sure to probably do 2 streams of this next week because I'm just so excited to finish this. I wasn't able to do twice this week because of some um, schedules that were counteracting with my schedule today and the other day. So here I am. I only managed to do one, but looking forward to do more next time. All right. So yeah, thank you again for coming here or watching this in my archive, and check out for more things to come in the near future. So please leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. So this is your boy Shrimp, signing off. Thank you and peace.